There's always a twist. There's always a twist. There's always a twist at the end. There's always a twist. There's always a twist. There's always a twist at the end. My friend, say let's friend, 'cause there's always a twist at the end. We got the pop and the rock and the Lindy Hop. We got the job behind and the staying alive. We got the conga and the salsa and the mighty big papa. The waltz and the shots and the bounces for France. There's always a twist. There's always a twist. There's always a twist at the end.
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff this week on the show. Really busy episode because we have not one, but two new episodes of Doctor Who from the new season. The 14th series / first season / 40th season, depending on how you want to number it. It's any of those. It's been marketed as all of them. But there you go. The new season of Doctor Who with Ncuti Gatwa. We're going to talk about both of those, Space Babies and The Devil's Chord. That'll be fun. We've got some really shitty news from Xbox, who continue to just make me want to take a hammer to my Xbox Series S. And we got some stuff. So it'll be a fun one. Except
yes,
when it
I have to congratulate you, Jonathan, because you are finished with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So
I am.
You're on the other side of that.
How far are you in that game? Because we're not going to talk about it today, but we'll just put the pin in it now.
Yes, because I just did all the stuff when you go back to Nibelheim, and then we're heading back to the Golden Saucer. And I'm looking up which quests are side quests are Tifa related side quests, because I don't want to date Red 13, because that's what's going to happen.
That's what happened to me.
There's the mechanic in that game that they borrowed from the original, where you have this sort of like affection thing, where at least in this one they show you that meter. In the original that was completely invisible to the player, but that determines who you date when you go to the Golden Saucer. And there was a moment when I finished up Cosmic Canyon, and I looked at Red 13's thing, and it was at the top, and it was higher than any other character. I'm like, oh. Because all it does is that if you do the side quests that are connected to characters, if you do the conversations that you get like once a chapter, if you pick like the best option, and then you do your two synergy moves with that character, and that's it. Which is a weird way to do the affection thing, because if you just want to do all the stuff in the game, if you want to do the side quests, you're using the synergy moves, and if you don't want to have Cloud just be a dick to everyone, I think that because I think I just did all of that. I just did it normally, how I would normally play the game, and then you just end up with Red 13 at the top. So I'm like, I when I went into Nibelheim, I'm like, okay, I'm going to look up what's the worst response. I'm going to get the worst response on everybody, and then I'm not going to do any side quests, and then I'm going to only do Tifa side quests because I want Tifa, because that to me is in my head, that's the character who Cloud is actually like romantically into. The Aerith thing is all complicated. But there's a very weird way to handle that I have to sort of look far ahead into the future in that game to try to not end up with a character I don't want to end up with.
Yeah, so I ended up with Red 13. I will say, though, the Red 13 version of that scene is fucking great. They do such a good job with... I mean, it's just anything with Nanaki in that game. Once they make that turn, he is adorable, and I like how they characterize him. Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure it's a fine scene. It's just,
Yeah, you just want Tifa. I understand.
I want the Tifa scene.
I was not thinking about it when I went through it. So my thoughts on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are... long beleaguered sigh. I hope that came through on the microphone. We will talk about it next time on the Weekly Stuff, because by the time we record another one of these, you will be done, and that will be the topic of episode 498 of this show. I think we can guarantee, and I'll just say, we'll have some shit to talk about.
I'm very curious to see the ending of the game, I guess. I don't know.
How are you feeling about it right now?
I feel the same way I felt about it the whole time. It's like there are things about it I like, which is mostly Queen's Blood. That's the best part. I unlocked a bunch more Queen's Blood stuff, and I'm like, yeah, great, awesome. I'm gonna go do all the new Queen's Blood stuff. I enjoy the combat. It's still the thing of where I enjoy the combat in the open world stuff. It gets incredibly tedious in the dungeon sections. In particular, the Ketchi dungeon, which is a very impressive piece of game design. It's a good teach by negative example of how not to make a dungeon. The story is incredibly long, slow, and beleaguered. But there's like just enough stuff I enjoy around the edges that it keeps me wanting to play the game. But because the stuff I enjoy is the side stuff, it does mean that the game just takes forever because I don't actually want to go do the main story. I don't really want to push that forward because that's not the thing I'm having fun with. So I'm spending longer on the game than I think I normally would have based on how my overall feelings on it. Because if it was a different kind of game, I probably would have started mainlining the story at this point and just said, I don't need to do the side stuff. But because the side stuff is the stuff that I actually enjoy, I'm spending a long time on it.
Interesting. We will talk about it more next time. But yes, that's one of the things I've been doing. In terms of housekeeping, Japanimation Station did recently finish part 5 of the season. Part 6 will be coming in June, where we'll be reviewing Sound Euphonium and A Silent Voice. So keep an eye out for that. We're working on that behind the scenes here. Over on jonathanlack.com, the weekly stuff wordcast, I have a bunch of new stuff that's been up. I started a new Saturday column, Star Wars Saturdays, because last Saturday was May the 4th. Which is the bad pun Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Ha 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 ha. We're all so clever. But it was also, and the real reason I decided to kick it off then was it was the 25th anniversary of The Phantom Menace. So I published, we're going to go for 9 Saturdays, do all the movies, going in episode order because I wanted to start with Phantom Menace because it was the 25th anniversary. But these are the pieces that are in my book, 200 Reviews, and the prequel pieces are almost all new and were fun to write. I particularly like that Phantom Menace piece because I look at it through the prism of the very weird opening crawl that movie has. And I think it's an entertaining piece. Attack of the Clones went up this weekend. In Miyazaki Madness, the series on the movies of Hayao Miyazaki, my Spirited Away piece went up this week. That's one of my favorite reviews I've ever written. So if you haven't read that yet, go do it. I also, transitioning into the stuff, Sean, wrote a review of Mobile Suit Gundam Seed Freedom, a title I do have to look at when I say it because it is a long title. It is a mouthful. But yes, it is Mobile Suit Gundam Seed Freedom, which played in theaters this week. We're not able to do a weekly Suit Gundam on it, unfortunately, because Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were not able to see it because it was a one-night only thing and it just was not working.
On a school night, which...
Yeah,
when I have to show up at work at 6:50 in the morning, I ain't watching nothing on a school night. I would literally fall asleep in the movie theater because it is literally past my bedtime is when that movie would have ended.
Yeah. So Sean has not seen it yet. We will do a weekly Suit Gundam on it eventually. I'll give just a quick 2 cents on it, spoiler free here. You can also obviously read my review over on the site, which is also basically spoiler free. But it's really good. It took me a little while to get into its rhythms because the one thing I will say about it is that the animation is hella awkward. And I think it's the same problem Seed has kind of always had, which is that it is a show forged in the fires of standard definition early digital animation that has never taken naturally to HD. The HD remasters of Seed and Destiny, I think, look awful. Yeah. I think you've got to get the original SD masters for it to look decent. And I think this movie, made 20 years later, has a hard time adapting that show's aesthetic to modern HD animation, particularly for the oldest characters in the series, like Kira, not oldest in terms of their ages, but from the earliest days of the show, like Kira and Lacus, look pretty awkward. Newer characters like Sheen or the characters invented for this movie look better because they were a little further along in kind of the development, I think, of anime history, and so they look a little more natural. So there's a little bit of a... And then also just Seed has a weird rhythm. It is one of the most, unique Gundam shows. And it is still Mitsuo Fukuda directing. It is still, even though she has passed away almost 10 years ago, it is still Chiaki Morisawa's script. And so it is very much Gundam Seed. But the thing to say about it is that it is both a direct sequel to Gundam Seed Destiny. The stuff that happened in Destiny happened. Shin Asuka is in the movie. He's now one of Kira's buddies, all that stuff. But it is also a remake of Destiny. It is also a stealth remake that takes all the kind of plot points of Destiny and is like, let's do a mulligan on that. Let's do it good this time. Because I would guess that the people most disappointed in Destiny aren't actually the fans. It's probably the people who made it, who are well aware that they made a show with 2 recap specials in its last 10 episodes. They know that show went south, and I think you can feel in Freedom them saying, okay, we had good ideas though. Let's try this again. This time with Kira as the main character. Kira is a real character this time, so is Lacus. The number one thing I know, Sean, you'll respond to is that from the word go, Kira and Lacus are now movers and shakers out in the world trying to make the world better. They are not sitting on their beach house waiting around for stuff to happen to them. It is like, it immediately fixes the biggest problem of Destiny. And I think the story takes a little while to get going. Once it does, it's very good. The last hour of this thing is unreal. It's got some of the best Gundam action ever. It's insane. The soundtrack, which is the same composer who did the shows, is phenomenal. It's one of the best Gundam soundtracks ever, and it sounds like early 2000s Gundam Seed music. It is like so on point. And then you've also got new theme songs by the people from TM Revolution and Seesaw, who did the original openings. Yuki Kajiura wrote the final song, and it is a Calafina song, 100%, which is kind of funny to hear that come up at the end of Gundam Seed. I'm like, this should be in a Garden of Sinners movie, but it works perfectly. The voice acting is tremendous throughout. Hiro Shimono plays one of the major new characters, and he fits into this world like a glove. And then all the returning actors are great. So, yeah, I think the number one thing to say is that it gives Gundam Seed a proper ending. And now, instead of recommending Seed to people and saying, yeah, Gundam Seed is weird because it's one great show and one terrible show, now you can say, Gundam Seed is worth watching. It's 100 episodes in a movie, and it gets a little dicey in the middle, but it ends strong. And that is a much better place for Gundam Seed's legacy than I think where it was before this movie.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I've been very excited. Like, I wish that their one night event was on the weekend, just so I could have been able to see it, or wait for my summer break to have started, because it was very close, because I've only got 2 weeks left before my summer break, because I really want to see the movie. It got good reviews and good response by fans of the original show. It did huge numbers in Japan. And yeah, so I'm very excited for it, because I'm a big fan of the original Gundam Seed, Seed Destiny notwithstanding. And as you say, it's nice that they get to sort of land the ship, because they tried to land it several times, because the other thing with Seed Destiny is there's like 3 or 4 different ways to try to watch the ending of that show, and now there's like it's not a different version of that ending. As you say, it's like trying to sort of actually give a proper conclusion to the Gundam Seed franchise, which Destiny, despite trying multiple times, is never able to actually do.
Yes. The funniest part of this movie, watching it in the theater, was there are a couple moments where, this is a Mitsuo Fukuda movie, he does some little flashbacks.
Oh, yes.
And once in a while, it will cut to footage from original Seed and Destiny, and everyone in the theater would go, because it was this old SD animation blown up in a movie theater, and there's no way to make it look good. There's just absolutely no way. Especially, I have some issues with the animation in this movie, but it is modern HD animation in a modern production cycle. Mm-hmm. And then you cut to, there's a moment where Sheen is remembering, for instance, the end where he shakes hands with Kira, and it will cut to that, and you all go, oh my god, the artifacting. And it's just very funny. But, no, it's a good movie. I hope, it'll come out soon. At some point, it'll be on Blu-ray in Japan, and that'll be online, or you can import it. And then I'm not sure how they'll distribute it here. Eventually, Kukuru's Doan's Island streamed on Crunchyroll, so I assume they'll do the same thing with this. But Gundam's in actually a weird place now, because the distributor of Gundam over here on physical media was Right Stuff, which was bought by Crunchyroll. But since that acquisition, they haven't done any more Gundam Blu-rays. So they haven't put out Witch from Mercury. So we don't really know how, distribution is happening from now on, so I'm curious what'll happen.
Yeah, I'm curious as well. I'm glad to hear that there are flashbacks in the movie, because I've long... we talked about it in the podcast. I've long held the position that people who criticize Seed for the flashbacks, which you could criticize it for it, but that criticism always was hinged on, and this is to save budget. And it's like, well, sometimes it is, but a lot more of it that people think is just purely a stylistic choice, and the fact that it's in the movie, where obviously the budget thing would not be concerned for why they would want to do flashbacks. I'm glad to have my take on that have been proven correctly, because there are a lot of people who diss Seed for the flashbacks because they think it makes the show cheap. You cannot like the flashbacks, that's totally fine, but they're just clearly that Fukuda likes building these big dramatic moments of having characters reflect on their own histories and showing them to you in flashback form. That is a very particular narrative choice he made a lot.
I do just wish I could have been in the room, though, when they were discussing, okay, how do we do these? Do we take footage from the show? Because we have to crop it. Well, I guess there's the HD versions, but those already look really blurry. What do we do? Do we reanimate those sections? I probably would have reanimated those sections if I were them, but I do understand. It's it's not as awkward as the Zeta Gundam new translation. Let's put it that way.
Yes, because at least they're flashbacks. They're not slotting it into the middle of a contiguous sequence.
Yes. Let's see. I also saw the movie Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes this weekend. The new Apes movie continues to be one of the coolest franchises in Hollywood in that it is just so different than anything else you get from big Hollywood franchises. You know, this is not made by the people who did the last few, because Matt Reeves is off doing Batman. This is directed by Wes Ball, who did the Maze Runner movies. I've never seen those. I don't know what the Maze Runner is, but the kids love it, apparently, at some point in the past. It
was a very popular young adult novel series. I have no knowledge of the movies in any way, shape, or form. But those movies are like the last gasp of jumping on the Harry Potter YA novel adaptation bandwagon that just then completely fell apart. And now then we went to superheroes. Now we're going into video games. So that's several trends ago at this point with Maze Runner.
Literally because Wes Ball was hired to do the Zelda movie that Nintendo is making. And actually, I will say, watching Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, I understand that choice. I would imagine it was this movie that got him that job, like people seeing footage of this before it was done, more than the Maze Runner stuff, because there is a certain, hero's journey quality to it that I like a lot. It's set 300 years after the events of War of the Planet of the Apes, and it does a cool thing where it jumps ahead generationally, and all the stuff that happened in the Andy Serkis movies is now this, distant memory that not all the apes even know about and is contested, and that's the coolest stuff in the movie. The movie lost me a little bit in its second half because it pulls, I don't want to spoil it, but it pulls a little twist where there's more human stuff in it than I thought. Not just I thought there would be going in, then the first 90 minutes of the movie very strongly tells you there is. And once the humans become a big part of it, my eyes glazed over a little bit. I don't care. It's really retreading territory from particularly Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which is a phenomenal movie you're not going to do better than. That's the first Matt Reeves one. And it kind of lost me a little bit. It's things still worth watching. It's, beautifully shot. It does the same thing that the Matt Reeves movies do, where it's very naturalistic photography out in the wilderness that they then put the CGI apes in. And I saying put them in is wrong even, because it's all mocap on location, which is the big innovation of these movies, is it's not mocap in a studio. And so the CGI apes look as good as they ever have, which is to say they are not distinguishable as CGI. They just look real, which is a crazy trick that they're able to do. The apes talk more in this one. We're more into apes riding on horse territory, all that good stuff. So, it is a very fun movie, and it does a lot of cool stuff. And again, it's, I think I liked this one. I was a little disappointed on the scale of the other apes movies. Next to your average Marvel movie or something, this is a 10 out of 10. So it's cool stuff.
Awesome. I'm just waiting for when we just move to the sequence where we get Planet of the Horses, where the horses get fed up about... First we were ridden by humans, now we're ridden by chimpanzees. When are we going to be in control? And
I think we need to get...
step.
You know how Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the whole plot is James Franco is trying to develop this Alzheimer drug, and that becomes the simian flu? I think there should be eventually Rise of the Planet of the Horses, where the apes are trying to develop some ape drug.
Yes.
And then it infects them, the horses become smart, and the apes die off, and we just continue the cycle. I think that'd be great.
Because the horses became super intelligent. I mean, you're fucked because you can't outrun those things. I mean, they're just going to chase you down. They're going to kick you in the face, and the horse will fuck you up if the horse wants to.
They're strong. We're very lucky horses are fairly docile as creatures. Because, yes, they could fuck you. And they do when they get messed up. So anyway, that's all my stuff. What have you been up to, Sean?
Mostly it's been playing a lot of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's been a lot of getting ready for the end of the year, because, again, I have only 1 week left of regular classes, and then it's finals week. And finals week is nothing, because it's half the days are only half days. They're just taking tests, and they're tests that the school doesn't give a shit about. So I can do whatever I want when they take a test. I could just leave and go to the teacher lounge, and probably nobody at a certain point would even care, because they've already taken their standardized state test. So what point is all of this stuff? So now that I'm at the ending of my grading cycle, I've got a couple of classes to finish their last project's grading, and then I put that in the books, wash my hands of it, and then go to summer. So that has been a lot of my time. That, and then obviously Japan Animation Station, I've been watching our next show for that and enjoying that as well.
Yeah, so Pretty much, so I did finish my semester, although my semester was a little weird because I wasn't teaching. So
Right.
I've been on fellowship. I finished writing the last chapter of my dissertation. I'm not quite ready to say I finished writing my dissertation because I do have to finish. There's going to be a conclusion, which is not the length of a chapter. It's going to be much, much shorter. And I have to go back and touch up the introduction because I wrote a draft of the intro, but then I wrote 4 chapters, and they're not exactly what I thought they were going to be, so I have to go back and fix the intro. But I've been starting to put finishing touches on things. Like I've started putting together the bibliography. I know some people hate doing that. For me, that's the easy work. I get to put on music. I get to watch TV. Well, that's just the fun part of putting together the kind of administrative slop at the end. I like that. And so I've been working on that. The chapter I just finished writing was such an insane task. Because I was on fellowship, I think I went way overboard with it than I normally would have. I was writing about this chapter. I can say the basics. It's about sort of how anime of the 21st century has integrated 3D imaging in multiple ways. There's a lot of vectors of that. Kimetsu no Yaiba is a major example in this chapter. Stuff like that. Land of the Lustrous is a major example in this chapter. And I realized pretty early on in writing and in researching that still images weren't going to work, because normally I would put in a couple stills with some of my examples, and that's fine if I'm writing about the handcrafted quality of an anime. You can get that in a still. I'm like, I'm writing about motion. I'm writing about shots. So I started just putting shots in Final Cut Pro, cutting them up, clips, cutting them up into shots, being able to label things for myself. And then eventually I realized, I can do just a little more work, honestly. And this can be a thing that I can present alongside the chapter that people can follow along with. And so in the end, I have a 2-hour video that accompanies the chapter full of 60 different clips from various anime that accompany the chapter. And then during the chapter, I'm saying, clip 7 shot G3, because that clip will have several segments, and then each segment will have its own shot list. At it way over the top in terms of work, but I think it's kind of cool because it's a audio-visual way of representing things. But that's what a lot of what I was working on this semester. But it is done, and I feel good.
Yeah, that's very cool. I mean, that makes sense because obviously a big point in anime of one of the primary reasons you want to use 3D elements is that it allows you to use a 3D camera.
Yes.
So it's the camera movement and stuff like that becomes so fundamental to the reasoning behind using it. So it makes a lot of sense that using a still frame is not going to communicate what is special about those sequences or what they're and what and why they're doing them.
Yeah. So it's a lot of good stuff, and now my internal deadline was finish this before the next season of Kimetsu no Yaiba started, because I didn't want to have even more data from that show to work with, and it's done. So I can say that was my cutoff point, and season 4 starts today from when we're recording this, May 12th. So I can watch that in peace and be I don't have to integrate this unless I feel the call, and hopefully I won't. I'll resist it.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can just get a little bit further Japanimation Station to force you to include something else, because I know that as we've watched things, that they've just sort of gotten sprinkled into footnotes and stuff that all the way through.
This chapter, one of the major examples is Hyoka for the scene with the video camera. That is an interesting use of 3D imaging for a very different. That was great as a counterexample, because a lot of what I'm talking about is big action scenes, and Hyoka, it's the most mundane scene in the show in amateur video, but because it is an amateur video, it takes this crazy use of CG technology to make it work. So that was an example. K-On! The movie gets a shout out for one of its big 3D shots. So yeah, it's stuff consistently has worked in there. It's been fun.
There you go. I wanted hit something to just you're just compelled shit, now I gotta go, new chapter, here we go. I'm just gonna extend it all the way out, baby. I'm just gonna do another semester just to include this.
No, I'm done. I'm graduating in the fall because I need a little time to revise, and the committee to read my dissertation and everything doesn't. I don't think they're all available to do this over the summer, so that is why I am doing one more semester. But I'm actually probably moving out of Iowa City. That's something I'm probably working on this summer. But anyway, I'll have more updates on that in the future. So that's all the stuff. Do you want to get into the news, Sean?
What's going on in the news, Jonathan?
The motherfuckers at Xbox decided to just blow up their company, I guess. I don't know. This is one of the worst stories we've ever had to cover. But, Xbox has been on an absolute layoff spree. They've been doing exactly what we all knew they were going to do after the Activision merger, but we all had to pretend they weren't going to do for that merger to go through. It's the complete utter joke of consolidation in this era, where there's something we all know will happen. They, pinky promise with their fingers crossed behind their back it won't, and then the government goes, okay, I guess you can have your merger, and then they do the worst possible things. This week, the worst possible things included Xbox closing Tango Gameworks, the creators of The Evil Within, Ghostwire Tokyo, and one of the number 10 games of the year here on the Weekly Stuff podcast, Hi-Fi Rush, and Arkane Austin, creators of Dishonored, The New Prey, and Redfall. And I will note, that's two of their only studios that have shipped literally any games for this console generation. But not good enough, I guess. It's better if you don't ship games. That's the Xbox message. It's been true for about 10 years. They do like it more when you don't ship games, we have learned. I've tweeted a lot about this. I've thought a lot about this. It disgusts me to my core. At this point, I don't know how anyone can be on Xbox's side on any of this. And I've even noticed that even the Xbox fanboys, who are a pretty toxic bunch out there, who, whenever I say anything critical, will come at me like, no, the merger is from God himself, and all that shit, and have like Elon in their bios. I think even them, they're very quiet this week because there is no defending this. This is really bad.
Yeah, because those were like the two biggest ones, but also they did shut down one of their mobile studios, Alpha Dog Studios, and then they sort of folded a fourth studio, Roundhouse Games, which is now a support studio on Elder Scrolls Online. So there are 4 ZeniMax studios, that 3 of them completely shuttered, one of them Xbox learning from Activision's example. Now that they have Activision, like, oh, you guys are really good at taking a studio that used to make their own games and then turning them into a studio that just works on this giant franchise. Let's do that. And so now they're just in the Elder Scrolls Online farms. It's appalling. I mean, it's not... on some level, it's not surprising. The one that is like really shocking is Tango Gameworks. I think that is the one that has caused the Xbox fans to turn, because I have seen the same thing. The sentiment has shifted. I think like games media is now kind of fed up with the Phil Spencer-ness of it all. The like,
yes, finally.
Yeah, the smile and dance. The like, I'm just a gamer too. Let me wear my like retro game shirt on the official Xbox podcast or on our like summer games show or whatever, and just be, I'm just one of you guys, is kind of like the attitude. And, Xbox has had this incredibly proactive, like exhausting, like PR strategy that has just been putting their execs in front of us constantly over and over and over again with interviews. I mean, God, how many fucking interviews have we seen from Phil Spencer just in this year, whether they're kind of weird off the cuff things, like he did that one kind of funny thing after Redfall, an interview in which he said that like the Redfall being a fuck up was their problem, like that Microsoft did poorly by that studio and didn't support them well. And he said, oh, like I totally own that. An interesting statement to be made when less than 12 months later you are shutting down that studio. But then he had all like the big round of Polygon interviews. We had the Xbox podcast around their strategy shift towards multi-platform games and all that. And then just this week we had, Sarah Bond, I forget what her title is, but she's one of like the higher ups at Xbox. She was giving an interview at Bloomberg. I think that was already scheduled before all this went through, and she just gave like a classically terrible non-response to the question given to her about why they shut these studios down. But it's just this like endless parade we get of Xbox trying to convince us that they're like the little guy, that they're just like, they're in it for the gamers, that they're like altruistic in their motives. They just want to bring games to everybody and bring everyone into video games and just have a good time. And that's it. And then, that has obviously always been a weird PR bullshit thing, but so many people within the Xbox fan base like bought it hook, line, and sinker. I think it allowed the games press to really treat them with kid gloves, because you're getting that access to Phil Spencer. They're not interviewing Jim Ryan or whoever's now the temp CEO for Sony PlayStation Like they don't give that many interviews. You don't get interviews with Furukawa and the people at Nintendo like every other week. So I think that like that promise of access and that like intimacy between the press and Xbox in that way has caused them to treat them with kid gloves. And now that's really come off because there's just no way to look at them shuttering fucking Tango Gameworks and not look at that as a truly heinous action, because Xbox has been struggling for almost forever on releasing games. I mean, it's been since the late 360 generation that it really started happening. Then by the time we got to the mid Xbox One generation, around the time Phil Spencer took over, the games just like more or less dried up, and they shuttered Lionhead Studios. They canceled games like Scalebound, and like a whole bunch of projects they had at that midpoint in the Xbox One generation, and they've never recovered, and they fucked up a bunch of their major franchises. They fucked up Halo. They fucked up the main Forza franchise because very quietly the last Forza Motorsport game was a massive bomb, and nobody in that fan base and likes that game. And so they just like kept on fucking up over and over and over again with a lot of their big franchises and just not having anywhere near the output of games they've needed. And then they had this one golden shining game, the second game, and maybe the last game I played on my Xbox Series S, because I played Halo Infinite, and then I played Hi-Fi Rush. And Hi-Fi Rush was just such an awesome game, a huge hit, a giant breath of fresh air with an amazing visual style, a nice, really focused design, a cool take on the character action game, which is a sort of game that Xbox typically does not have a lot of, particularly not these days. And it was a game that just like you can't not like. Like, it's such a good game. Anyone who played it likes it. And a lot of people loved it. For some people, it was their favorite game of that year. And that's, competing with Tears of the Kingdom and Baldur's Gate 3 and some of like the biggest games of recent memory. And Hi-Fi Rush was like competitive in that space. And then the studio gets fucking shut down. Like, goodbye, sorry, good luck on your future endeavors, but you are no longer a part of this company and you no longer are employed. And that is awful.
Yeah, I mean, Hi-Fi Rush was pure 110% upside for Xbox.
Yep.
Even if it hadn't sold well, and by all accounts it did for the kind of game it was, and it pushed Game Pass.
It was a $30 game, just for context. Yeah. Like, it was a smaller budget title, like it designed and sold to the audience that way. So it's like it didn't need to sell 15 million copies. That's not the kind of game it was.
And they just pushed it multi-platform with the PS5 release, or is that not even out yet? I forget.
No, I think that just came out.
That just came out. So it's just, expanding. But put the sales aside, it was nothing but good press in a time when Xbox needs actual good press, not journalists covering their asses to get access good press. The, fawning, we're going to say nice things about Phil Spencer so he doesn't turn the tap off press, which is cowardly bullshit. But like actual good press. This is a good game that you should go turn on your Xbox for, right? Like, that's the kind of press they were getting. They were getting awards from it, all sorts of good stuff. It's the kind of thing that you would look at and go, hey, maybe this dead fucking console, which is what Xbox is to most people. I think the games press also does not understand that Xbox is a joke to most, like, young people coming up are not buying Xboxes. They're buying Switches or PS5s. And Xbox isn't even a consideration. It's like Facebook for the young generation. It's not a fucking thing anymore. And this is the kind of thing that, like, could start to reverse that trend, and then we shut them down. And over on Arkane Austin, Redfall was a disaster, but it's a disaster because Microsoft made them do something that they weren't good at or wanted to do. And other than that, all of their games are also games that are pure upside. Like Dishonored, I would think, is one of the reasons you bought Bethesda. Mm-hmm. And of course, you can get other people to make Dishonored, but and they have. But it's still ridiculous. That is a team that has so much potential. And again, I have to stress, these are two studios with a proven track record of shipping games that are polished and are good. And Redfall was a little outside of that, obviously, but I think there are good reasons for that. But like, Ghostwire Tokyo didn't light the world on fire, but it came the fuck out and it was well received. Hi-Fi Rush came out. Redfall, whatever else you want to say about it, they shipped that game. And Xbox has a lot of other studios that cannot do that, especially their internal studios that are not their acquisitions. And it's appalling. And the thing for me that finally felt vindicating this week was to finally see major news organizations start to say, maybe Phil Spencer is bad at his job. And the thing is, you and I have been saying this for years. Objectively, he is bad at his job. By any objective metric, Xbox has done terribly under him. Does it look better compared to the announcement of the Xbox One? Sure. But that is also the announcement of the Xbox One was idiotic, but it was also an announcement. We don't know how that would have gone in those hands long term. The Xbox One under Phil Spencer was a disappointment. The Xbox Series under Phil Spencer has been a failure. And over that course of those years, we have seen the implosion of their most successful brands like Halo into pure muck. Halo Infinite destroyed that brand. Gears of War has had good games that have not been supported, and now it's been God knows how many years since Gears 5, so who knows what the fuck is happening with that. And then everything, Fable, they closed Lionhead Games and then decided later on, we do want Fable, so we'll get the Forza Horizon people to do it, even though Forza Horizon is one of our only franchises that's actually still working, but I guess we'll pull those people off of that. They killed Forza. It's been just an unmitigated disaster every turn of the way. This person is bad at their job. A lot of the other people there are bad at their job. There is a culture of just, endless development hell with everything they make that results in these muddied products that no one wants to play. It's a dumpster fire over there, and I'm glad that if there's any silver lining to this, it's that people are finally sitting up and taking notice, but I really wish it didn't involve the shuttering of two great studios for people to finally realize that.
Yeah, because it's because Tango and Arkane Austin, I mean, they're just such fan favorite kind of studios because their games are so beloved by the people who like them, and I'm not even like a big Dishonored guy. Like, I like Dishonored 1 and Dishonored 2, but I totally understand why the people who are like way into those games are way into those games because they're super well made and they're unique and they've got a strong central creative vision. And it's like the idea that you had Harvey Smith, the guy who was the creative director for Dishonored 1 and Dishonored 2, and someone who's, goes back to games like Thief on the PC, is just such like a visionary, fantastic game director with such a long legacy in this industry. You had that dude on your payroll and you kicked him to the curb. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, how can you not find a way? I understand, your weird business shit of the way that capitalism is working and the lack of growth in Game Pass, and then there's, just the general economic situation is shit. Like, obviously, everywhere is laying off people, but not everybody is shutting down whole studios. And the fact that you're shutting the entire studio down and just, closing off that entire history and that legacy that studio and, the people that worked there carried, it's so sad. And it's a thing that Xbox has been doing for a long time at this point. Like, I think the best article written about this is the Eurogamer one that specifically draws the connection between the Lionhead shuttering in 2016 after Microsoft just slowly killed that studio. Because the one thing that article didn't even cover, it covered Fable Legends, the terrible, canceled, multiplayer Fable game. But it didn't even cover the fucking Kinect game, Fable the Journey, that they were forced to make. Where it's like Microsoft slowly strangled that studio and then killed it. And then immediately after they killed it, it was like, oh, now we have no video games anymore because the only people who make video games for us are these handful of companies we've created, 343, that we built just to service a specific franchise. A colossal mistake in designing a studio, if there ever has been one, because now those studios, 343 and the Coalition, can never escape from underneath the shadow of the franchises they've been made for. So if that franchise starts to sunset like Halo has, and Gears has just been a weird sort of place for a long time where the 3 and 4 and 5 were well received, but didn't set the world on fire. And I never get the sense that there's a strong fervor around that franchise. Xbox is just in this weird no man's land with so many other studios, thus causing them to buy up every fucking person on the market. And then now that things have gone a little sour financially, that means that now all those studios are the first on the chopping block. And the thing that's so fucking gross about it is that the pure reason for why these are the studios that were shuttered is because they are the studios that released games. Because they are the studios. This is something that Jason Schreier's report at Bloomberg kind of helped pinpoint, that kind of locked into my head. Okay, this makes sense of their reasoning. It's evil, but I understand now why it's these two studios. I don't think it has anything to do with how well Redfall or Hi-Fi Rush performed critically, commercially, or anything like that, is because these are the studios that had finished their development cycle, were starting up pre-production on their next projects. And that's when, okay, well, now Microsoft's going to look at them and say, do we have the money or the incentive, or do we want to finance the next project from these studios? And because they were just the next in line and it just happened to be right now, well, then they're on the chopping block. It has nothing to do with the studio. It has nothing to do with the games, the performance, anything else. It is purely, as far as I can see, a matter of luck and happenstance. It is just because in this exact moment is when your cycle lined up that you are going to go. If Double Fine had put Psychonauts 2 out a couple months ago rather than a couple years ago, Double Fine would be gone. If Playground had just released Fable, maybe Playground Games would go bye-bye, and so let's get someone else to make Forza Horizon. Maybe go turn 15, you finish your Forza game, maybe you do Forza Horizon now, right? Like, whatever studios they have, if they had happened to be the studios that just finished their games and were now starting up their next project, that is when Xbox looks at them and says, oh, well, this is an easy way to cut these costs, is we can just not finance this project and just shutter that studio. And that is like the most David Zaslav WB ass attitude towards running your goddamn company, that has nothing to do with what you're making. It has nothing to do with games or art or anything like that. It only has anything to do with money. And yes, all these companies, it's true of Nintendo and Sony, obviously money for like the top people is their primary concern. They're business people, but they are still running video game companies, and you still get the sense that the people at PlayStation, Sony, and the people at Nintendo care about the fact that their companies are video game companies and not just whatever else companies. Yes. In the same way that, like, when you look at it with Zaslav, the problem with him at WB is it doesn't matter to him what company it is. It could be any company. Right? It doesn't matter what they're making. He hadn't run
any kind of narrative media until 2019. He had never been involved with movies.
Yeah. So it's like he doesn't give a shit about the products. So it's just a pure money game. And that's how you end up in the movie business, with these just insane situations where a movie can be made and finished, and they just go, oh, we're just not going to release it because our graph here tells us that this line will be a little bit more in the green if we just actually don't release the movie and we get a tax write-off, right? Like, it's the exact same kind of reasoning here where, oh, well, the timing lined up, we're just going to shutter you and shut you down and send you off. It doesn't matter that Xbox has been complaining loudly for years about how they have bad Japanese game support and they wanted to have a Japanese studio on the books. Well, they had a Japanese studio on the books for a couple years with Tango. They made one of the most well-received Xbox games in recent memory. And then now we are back to they have no Japanese studios on the books anymore. And I'm looking forward to, in a couple of years, them starting to complain about, oh, well, all the Japanese support has dried up again. Guess why?
Well, and even if you go with the it's about money thing, it's about money in the, like, absurd short term, yes. Right? Because if you care about the long-term stability of your business, you would want Tango and Arkane on your books, because they are studios that get fan interest, that get grassroots interest, that overall improve the brand in ways that will undoubtedly be better for your bottom line in the long run. Like, this is something Nintendo understands. When Nintendo has faced periods of real challenge like the Wii U, they don't fire half their fucking studios. They reinvest and they do it better the next time, and they keep all of their institutional knowledge around so that in the jump from Wii U to Switch, they're not having to scramble to figure out who's making the games. They get the Switch off the ground and make it work by having a bunch of great games out there from people who have been doing this their whole lives, often as a team. Right? Yeah. You know, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom last year, one of the highest selling games of the year, despite only being on the Nintendo Switch. Same exact team that did, Breath of the Wild, which was the same team that did Skyward Sword, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is, and Sony understands this too, because part of the Sony magic with why people like PlayStation's library of exclusives is it's a bunch of developers who have pretty deep institutional knowledge and know what they're doing, and are supported to keep doing what they do. And that is, it's not like a secret how you get success like Sony or Nintendo. It takes hard work and it takes a long-term planning kind of thought process, but it is clear, it is possible. And Xbox just... Part of why the long term of Xbox over the last decade plus, the entire life of this podcast, has been such a disaster is they are completely short-termist. And so if you're only thinking about the short term, inevitably nothing good really comes out of that. And I also just have to think, how psychically damaging is this for everyone else at Xbox? Because the team over at Ninja Theory, for instance, is currently finishing work on Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, which is the next major Xbox release. It comes out May 21st. They're probably getting shuttered. I think there's almost no doubt that they are the next on the chopping block, because they will be in the same situation you just mentioned with Tango and Arkane, where they will have finished a game and they will be figuring out what the next step is, and that probably means for Xbox, that means they can go bye-bye. Because Hellblade 2, if Hellblade 1 is any indication, is not going to be some massive Assassin's Creed-style popular hit. It's a weird little indie game. From a kind of weird little indie studio. Not quite little, but you know what I mean.
Yes. I mean, smaller than your, like, big AAA type studios,
yes.
for sure.
So, like, all those people are probably out of a job soon. And, like, the game has... It's irrespective of how the game does. That is probably the case. And it is so depressing to think about that.
Yeah, because you just have to wonder what those people of those studios are feeling, because it's particularly, Xbox has quite a few studios that are in the same sort of category as Arkane and Tango, of like, they're not quite AAA, but they're certainly not small studios, because Ninja Theory absolutely fits in that. Obsidian fits in that, and they've got Avowed, their next game. That's assuming that hits its date. I think that's supposed to be this fall. So, that's another studio I think is exactly in this category that I could see Xbox saying, well, we can get rid of them, and it's not like, you're not cratering one of their premier studios. Like, I think 343 and Coalition and some of, like, the in-house Xbox game studios, that's a confusing sentence to say, but it's Xbox game studios and they are game studios, right? The game studios that are in that sort of first-party core lineup that Xbox developed on their own years ago, I think they're probably more protected because they're also bigger studios that are in charge of their bigger franchises, regardless of how successful those have been. But, these other studios like Obsidian, like Ninja Theory, like Double Fine is absolutely one of these. They could absolutely, you can see them being shut down because there's nothing. If there wasn't anything protecting Tango, there's nothing protecting them. I mean, Hi-Fi Rush is the best game Xbox has had in terms of critical success in forever. And it performed well. Like, it's one of those things of where people keep on pulling out multiple different quotes over the course of the past year of different Xbox reps talking about, like, oh, and it hit all of our expectations, or it surpassed all of our expectations, and so on and so forth. And it's, and who knows how honest those quotes were. Maybe it didn't hit their expectations. Who knows what their expectations were? But at the very least, publicly, Xbox is very, like, bullish about Hi-Fi and Tango, and kept on saying, like, we can't wait till their next project to see what they're going to do. We know now that Tango was in pre-production on making a sequel to Hi-Fi Rush, and similarly that Arkane Austin was in pre-production on Dishonored 3, and so we know that they were going to continue the franchises that people wanted from them, right? It's like Arkane Austin was not going to go make Redfall 2. Redfall was a big misstep, but also an understandable misstep given where the industry was when that game started development, the fact that Microsoft took ownership of the studio partway through, that COVID hit partway through. Like, if that studio can't weather a single bad release, like, what's the point of having these? No studio can. Yeah, exactly.
Every studio has bad releases. And, like, I think the other thing is, these studios we're talking about are the actual pillars holding up Xbox.
Yes.
Like 343 and the Coalition and even Bethesda Game Studios. They're not the things helping Xbox right now, because Halo Infinite was kind of a disaster when you look at, like, especially like its support after launch, just utter crater. And the amount of money they must have put into that, there's no way that game got into the black. There's just absolutely no way. There has not been a Gears game in 5 years. It was 2019 was Gears 5. Over on Bethesda Game Studios, Starfield did nothing. I'm sorry, like, it maybe sold some copies, but it did nothing for the brand. No one talks about that game. It is not an ongoing concern. It got completely swallowed by the Baldur's Gate 3 hype because it was just not the game anyone wanted. And so, like, those aren't the pillars holding up Xbox. It's stuff like Tango that can put out a Hi-Fi Rush. It's stuff like Obsidian that has put out both Grounded and Pentiment, which have been small-scale hits, but like real, like people like, especially Pentiment, got really good reviews. Both of those have gone multi-platform now, like real assets. And I think when you think about Obsidian's last like big release, The Outer Worlds, assuming Avowed will be like that, people loved The Outer Worlds. That was a game that like clearly filled a niche that people wanted in the market, and Avowed will presumably do the same thing. And so all of these quote-unquote little studios, they're the ones actually making it so that Xbox has anything to put their, to stick in their hat, right? And now Xbox is talking about the next generation. We're going to have the biggest generational leap in technology ever. And my question is, who's making games for it? Is it just Call of Duty? Okay, I'll be able to play that on my PC and PlayStation, so I don't really give a shit. Is it Bethesda? Well, all their games still look like they were made in 2011 and do not need the newest technology to run, because they are a dinosaur of a studio very clearly. So like, I would be thrilled to see, Obsidian or Tango Gameworks make something with the most, advanced technology ever, but that's not going to happen because they're probably either are shut down or will be shut down. And so, and this is something we've seen over and over again, from the Xbox One X to the Series X, and now their announcement of their next console, that they think hardware is the solution here. And it's so bizarre for them to think that. One, because they are part of Microsoft, a company that doesn't do hardware and learned early on that they were better off doing software, but also because all the power in the world doesn't help you outsell the fucking Nintendo Switch over here if it's got the right games. It's just not the metric anyone cares about.
Yeah, and like Sony, they're competing against Sony, who, since the One X and then now the Series X, those are two consoles that on paper are technologically more advanced than their rivals, right? The PS4 Pro and the PS5. But the reality of the market is that game developers are going to design the game for whatever, is the primary platform, the one that's going to have the largest number of users. For last generation, for these kinds of games, it was the PS4. For this generation, for these kinds of games, it was the PS5, right? If you're putting Switch games in a different kind of category, because it is, right? Because they're different kind of technological levels. But if you're looking at the Series X versus the PS5 is the primary platform that these studios are designing for, and then they port those to the PC, and they port those to the Series X. And as a result, the Series X version is either on par with or a little bit worse than the PS5 version almost every single time. The number of games that have like notable improvements technologically on the Series X are so slim, and whatever those improvements are barely noticeable. So it's like, Sony was able to create a cheaper to produce console that there was able to be produced easier, right, at higher volume. So they were able to weather the shortages much faster. Like, it took fucking Microsoft forever, like twice as long than Sony, to get past their shortages on their premium consoles. Like, that's the reason why Series S wildly outsold the Series X, because Microsoft could not fucking make Series X's. It's not because people wanted the Series S more. It's just that they could not get enough Series X's out there because it was too difficult a console for them to manufacture. And Sony blew past them so fast on so many different ways, because it's not just about making the most, impressive kit. It's about making the smartest piece of kit for the market that you're trying to target. Nintendo, for their platform level and like the technological level they're aiming for in their portable nature, are really fucking good at that. Sony is really good at that for the more high-end console experience, because they know which corners to cut and which corners not to get the most bang for their buck. And, does it end up as the like most elegant console? No. Like, I think if you look at the Series X, like breakdowns where, like Digital Foundry, like take it apart and look at how all the pieces are assembled, like it's a beautiful piece of engineering, but it can be the most beautiful piece of engineering in the world, and that's not going to help advance your position in the market. And I think like Xbox has just kept on making the same mistakes over and over and over again, whether it's in their hardware design or in how they handled their studios, or now they're in this insane position with Game Pass, where they have hitched their entire business to the subscription service that has been stalled for like 2 years at this point and is not growing at all. it will not
because
be able
basically
to grow.
all subscriptions have been stalled. And the way streaming services have been able to counter that is to do ad-supported models that lower the price. And there's plenty of consumers who are fine with that. But we can't just put commercials in video games. There's no way to lower the price of Game Pass. They're completely stuck.
Yeah, and now they're fucked. Like, Starfield didn't move the meter on Game Pass subscriber count at all based on the data. Like, if it did, it would only be because it prevented them from losing more people. And I don't know what, obviously Xbox probably has some idea of those metrics that wouldn't be publicly available. But what we do know is that it did not go up in any noticeable way because of Starfield or any of their other releases. And so you really have to wonder, thinking about now, the future of Xbox, what happens with a Phil Spencer at this point? If you've bet the farm on this Game Pass strategy to the point of, buying the biggest third-party publisher in the industry, which was Activision, now you own them. What do you do with those games? Do you put Call of Duty Day One on Game Pass? Does that make any kind of financial sense?
No, whatsoever? You do not.
But if you don't, then what is Game Pass? What is Game Pass if it is not the service where all the Xbox first-party games go on day one? Because if you're not doing that, if you think the Xbox fans are mad now, imagine how they would feel if the thing that has been the, pride and joy of the Xbox community since, 2017 or so, whenever Game Pass started, because it was a really forward-looking service, and, it's obviously a great value if you're someone who wants to play a wide variety of games, and it's not going to buy a lot of games outside the service. Game Pass, there's a reason why people liked it so much as a service for the people that were in that ecosystem. But that is the one thing you've got if you're an Xbox person. You've got Game Pass. That's your thing. That's the thing Xbox has been selling, is the thing they have made their entire pitch for years at this point. And the thing that they always say is, and all of our games will come out day one on Game Pass. That has always been the thing that has separated their services from everybody else, is that that it's always made it feel like Xbox is fully committed because they're going to put their games on that service day one, come hell or high water. Well, hell and high water has come, and I'm curious to see if those promises are going to hold true, or if Microsoft's strategy that clearly has been shifting for a little bit now with all the multi-platform stuff, how far that shifts, and if it shifts far enough for Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, for him to just say, we need a different strategy and we need a different person in charge of that strategy. Because Phil Spencer has been the Xbox guy for 10 years at this point. People blamed the Xbox One stuff on Mattrick. Mattrick was only in charge of the Xbox One for its launch, basically. And Phil Spencer was obviously there as one of the top guys. He was the head of the Xbox Game Studios during that whole run. So it's not like he had no say or responsibility in that either. But he was the Xbox One guy for the whole life of that console, and now for obviously the whole life of the Series console. I'm curious, this feels like it's a thing that could potentially be, we're going to see a huge shakeup kind of at every level with Xbox, I think is where it feels like we are potentially heading at this point.
There needs to be. I honestly think at this point, the only path that really makes sense is to get out of the hardware business, become a major publisher, and probably sunset Game Pass. Because it just doesn't make sense. Game Pass was always this thing that was trying to emulate Netflix and the movie streaming model. And since Game Pass came out, the movie streaming model has actually changed quite a bit because everyone realized the economics of that didn't even make sense for movies and TV. The era of making $300 million movies for a streamer and not putting it in theaters, that's over. Netflix might have a few more of those, but even they are backing off on that approach because there's just no math that will ever make that make sense. Apple TV had two big movies last year. They had Killers of the Flower Moon and Napoleon. They put them both out in theaters. They both made their money there, and then they went on streaming, and that is obviously the thing that makes sense because then you're getting all the money every step of the chain, not cutting off, $1 billion at the front end. So a lot of stuff
also doing, you're seeing a lot more home releases of these streaming shows as well, where that was a thing that didn't happen forever. And then now, Disney is starting to do that for some of their streaming shows and things like that. And so you are definitely seeing these people who bet the whole farm on like, it's all just streaming all the way down, and abandoned all of like the additional revenue sources that kind of content used to bring in. And now they're all like, well, why don't we just there's no reason not to do both or all three. Yes. Or however different like versions of getting money off this thing you can do. We can do it with ads, and we can do it with like a higher tier streaming, and we can put out a Blu-ray, and if it's a movie we can put it in theater. You can do all that shit, and we can put it out on someone else's streaming service too. Why the fuck not? Who cares? You want to put this on Peacock? Also fine. Like you pay us some money and we'll let you have that, right? Like they're going
Max
exactly
has been putting
back to
out
that.
A bunch of HBO shows on Netflix because Netflix will pay for it. People watch HBO there, and then if they like that, maybe they come over to Max and watch more stuff there. What's the first thing any financial expert, any fiduciary will tell you to do with your finances? They will tell you to diversify your portfolio, right? Like, that is something you want to do, and all of entertainment has moved in this direction of undiversifying, and now they are re-diversifying because it makes sense. The problem with Xbox is Game Pass can't be re-diversified the way that, like, HBO Max can, right? They can maybe start to put games on other people's services would be kind of, I guess, the equivalent, but it doesn't fix the problem of that you are putting your games for free on this service that gets you way less money than you would from selling the games individually. Like, I don't see any potential upside for Call of Duty going on Game Pass. That is a $70 game that you are guaranteed to sell tens of millions of copies of at $70 that you are potentially trading in for $15 a month. No, there is no, it's the same thing as making a $200 million movie and not putting it in theaters. There is no version of the economics of that makes sense, and there never, ever, ever will be. And that is the thing, that is where this all hits the rocks and breaks down.
Yeah. So I'm just so curious because it has just been it's been a very rough year for the whole game industry. And it is important to always remember that, like, obviously Xbox is not the only games company that is struggling. They are all struggling in different ways because the COVID bubble burst and there's just a lot of shit going on that is causing this to happen. But man, Xbox is just not in a good position to try to weather this, and them buying Activision and all that shit happening around the same time. Like, it's just clear that the whole game, like the soil underneath their feet has shifted so dramatically in a very short period of time. And it's just been an insane year. We had the whole blow up with the multi-platform strategy. They laid off 1,900 people earlier this year. It's not even counting the thousands of people they laid off last year also. And then now they've shuttered 3 studios and folded a 4th studio into one of their other studios. And, who knows what's going to happen next. While I was saying that sentence, I just thought of, there's another studio I wasn't even thinking of. That would be this. It's the same one of these studios that is also at risk now, is Machine Games putting out Indiana Jones either this fall or potentially early next year. That's another one potentially on the chopping block. And it's like, I really hope that Microsoft shifts its strategy before more studios are sacrificed, because if they shifted to being just like primarily a third-party publisher, and like that was their main thing, and maybe they'd make like a PC style handheld or whatever, like they could still do some hardware stuff. Microsoft still has hardware initiatives as a company. It would still make sense if you're operating in the PC space to have their own incredibly shitty PC store, but it is still their PC store. They're trying to make their mobile store, right? They're trying to do all of that. At a certain point, like, what if you just said, we don't really need the Xbox console? Just doesn't make sense for them anymore. They exist in the PC space. You can exist in the mobile space if you want. They've got, their Candy Crush or whatever they now own because they bought King from Activision. If they move to that, I hope that would then mean that it would change their mindset around closing these studios, because what those studios mean for them would mean something different if they're not thinking them as first-party studios, and instead thinking them as a studio that is primarily putting out their games on every platform available. And I think that could be a lifeline that would save developers like Obsidian or Machine Games or Double Fine or all the other studios they have that are in that kind of AA mid-tier range, Ninja Theory. Like, I don't want those studios to shut down, because they have all of these cool creative studios that make these cool games. All of those studios are studios that have made games I've loved. And it would just be so tragic for all of them to die because Microsoft is trying to die on this fucking hill with their first party shit. And they just bought up everybody just to shut them down. That's a very predictable future. It's a future I hope they avoid.
That Indiana Jones game, they are insane if they do not put that out on PS5 at the same time. They are insane. I'm sorry. That is not a game that is going to sell a single Xbox. It is not going to sell a Game Pass subscription. What I think it could do is for people who already have hardware. They have a PC, they have an Xbox, or they have a PlayStation. It could be, because it looks like it's probably going to be good. Machine Games has a great track record. I think if it gets good word of mouth, it could sell a lot of copies. What it's not going to do is sell systems. And that's not a reflective of the quality of the game or anything, but we saw last year when the new Indiana Jones movie bombed. Like, that brand is not that kind of strong anymore. It's something that, like the Wolfenstein games, is going to get a lot of critical word of mouth, and maybe we'll have a potentiality there, but in those cases, you want it everywhere. You don't want it to try to make it a system seller, because that's not what it's going to do.
Yeah, Microsoft on their studio buying spree, they bought so many studios that are in that category that are not system sellers. Like Bethesda Game Studios, normally I would say is a system seller kind of studio. Starfield was not that game, but Skyrim would have been. Fallout 4 probably would have been as well. I don't particularly love Fallout 4 as a game, but Fallout 4 sold like 15 plus million copies. It's a huge selling game.
Well, and as we just saw from the Fallout show on Amazon, that brand has quite a bit of strength to it.
So it's like they bought up a few studios that are in that tier, but most studios they bought are in that tier of like, they've never made a huge amount of money. They've always struggled a little bit, but man, every fucking game they put out is a critical darling and has a huge cult fan base. And they just have like half a dozen studios that are in that tier. And it scares the shit out of me that they're just going to kill all of them, because we've lost a lot of studios. Embracer has shut so many studios down over the past year or two. It's so sad to see this happening and how harshly the game industry is retracting right now in this very short-sighted sense, where like eventually things will turn, right? We're not going to be in this financial situation forever. Eventually you're going to want to have video game developers making good games for you, because that's going to work out for you in the future. Right now it might not seem like it because of the way that things are going, but it will turn just as it always has. And it's like games like movies or whatever form of entertainment, there's always going to be a market there, and you're going to need talented, skilled people to make things in that market. So if you're someone who gives a shit about money, which these people seem to give a shit about money, don't shut these people down, because they will eventually make money for you, you assholes.
It is a little Econ 101 thing that seems to have been lost. This all sucks. Sean, do you want to cheer ourselves up by talking about Doctor Who?
Yeah, let's talk about something fun. Let's talk about something very joyous, which is our new returning Doctor Who.
Indeed. So this weekend, we got the premiere of Series 14 / Season 40 / Season 1 of Doctor Who, the first season with Ncuti Gatwa playing the 15th Doctor and Millie Gibson as his companion, Ruby Sunday. This premiered on Disney Plus and over in the UK on BBC iPlayer with 2 episodes. We got Space Babies and we got The Devil's Chord, both written by Russell T Davies. Space Babies directed by Julianne Robinson. The Devil's Chord directed by Ben Chessel. My quick reaction, I thought Space Babies was solid, not great, but certainly better than some of RTD's other season premieres that I've seen, like New Earth, but maybe not the best one. And then I thought The Devil's Chord was one of the coolest fucking things this show has ever done in any of its incarnations. So I had a jolly good time on Friday night. What about you, Sean?
Yeah, I think I overall probably have a similar reaction. I don't know if I'm that hot on The Devil's Chord. I really like it. I think it's a very good episode. I don't know if I would put it in that, like, it's like...
I don't think it's one of the best. I said coolest for a reason.
Yeah, it's a wild fucking episode, absolutely.
Yes.
And it's like a big sort of like throwing down the gauntlet for, this is like, a new era for Doctor Who. But yeah, overall, I think Space Babies is a solid episode that's got a lot of good Doctor companion stuff. The baby stuff is a kind of hit or miss. There's like there are like moments where I kind of like it, moments where I don't think it fully works. But like as an episode to sell you on this version of the Doctor and the companion, like I think it's really good at giving us just an adventure with those two. And then The Devil's Chord, that's the one that's like going out more on a limb and is a pretty fucking crazy episode. Like it absolutely is stretching the boundaries of what you would expect to see from a Doctor Who in a way that feels similar to some of the stuff you had in The Church on Ruby Road and similar to some of the stuff you had in The Giggle, the David Tennant's second last episode, or third last episode, I guess, if you count the 50th anniversary in there as the last episode for David Tennant. I'm sure we'll get another one eventually. That boy can't stay away from Doctor Who. But we've had this sense of like the shifting style, the move towards some more fantasy stuff with those episodes. And the Devil's Chord is like, okay, let's take those ideas we sort of started incubating in those couple episodes and blow them up into something pretty crazy.
Yeah, my overall reaction is that we are just in an incredibly exciting period for Doctor Who right now. I think we've had 6 episodes. We had the 3 David Tennant ones. Now we've had 3 Ncuti Gatwa ones, and all written by Russell T Davies so far. So we haven't even seen anyone else come in and play in the sandbox yet. And next week we get fucking Stephen Moffat. I'm so psyched for that. It's great. But like just through these, I think RTD has come back honestly better than ever. Like, I don't think there is, I said this, I don't know if you could identify another 6-episode stretch that is as consistently excellent as in his original tenure. And people pointed out a couple, like the last half of season 3, I would say yes, except I think the season 3 finale is a hot mess with 10th Doctor Jesus. So I don't know if I would go that far. And I'm not saying that these are the best episodes ever, although there have been a couple of, great ones like Wild Blue Yonder. I think The Devil's Chord is up there. It's exciting. It feels like someone who has a really confident grasp on the show, but also is intent on steering it in a direction that it has never gone before in its 60 years of existence. And I think that combination, combined with Ncuti Gatwa being just unbelievably good right out the gate as the Doctor, makes this a really, really fun, exciting time to be a Doctor Who fan, old or new, because this also is just a great period to enter the show if you haven't before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just feels so rejuvenated, and especially like getting these where they're like, they're quote unquote normal episodes of Doctor Who. Obviously, like Devil's Chord is weird in a lot of ways, but just, I mean that in terms of they're not event episodes, because we had the 3 David Tennant ones. Those are all kind of event episodes because they're this returning Doctor and a returning companion and all this crazy, kind of unprecedented sort of thing in the history of Doctor Who, what that like kind of mini season is, whatever you want to call it. And then you had the Christmas special, Church on Ruby Road, which is a Doctor introduction story. It's a companion introduction story, and it's a Christmas special. So it's a very, like, unusual kind of episode. Whereas these two, they are like, okay, now let's just do a season of Doctor Who, and let's see what a season of Doctor Who looks like with this team. And it's awesome. Like, one thing I think is so good about these 2 episodes that's true of everything since RTD has come back is just the production itself, the design, the the costumes and the sets and the CG effects and the practical effects and the direction, the editing, the sound design, the music, the acting, the writing. All the different pieces are so good. And like, it doesn't necessarily mean that the episode is going to be the best episode ever. Space Babies is not some extraordinary episode, but it does mean that even if there are, it's not the most amazing episode ever, it's still a solid episode. Like, the production feels so fucking tight. And it reminds me of like kind of like Capaldi years, where I feel like you had the same sensation there with that latter half of the Moffat years, where it's like, everyone was kind of locked in. They had so many good writers on staff. They had so many good directors on staff. Like, everyone was so experienced on that crew that like the show just felt like honey, it just super smooth, just like this great production. That obviously was one of the big things lost amongst various things in the Chibnall years, and was one of the huge casualties of that period. And then now this is the best that stuff has ever been, just as not just for Doctor Who, but for TV shows in general. I just think it's such a well-produced show. And there's a real kind of pleasure to watching that.
Yeah, and it feels also well-positioned to be a big global hit now that it is on Disney Plus and it is streaming. And I know, to our British friends, I know it's a little bit of a bummer that we are getting the episodes before you now, but I just want to tell everyone what it used to be like to watch Doctor Who before this season, because it was stuck on BBC America.
Oh, God.
BBC America is not a channel that you normally get in the United States. It's not just in your normal package. It's like in an extra cable package, which means you had to have a whole lot of hoops to jump through just to get the channel. Then if you actually wanted to watch it that way, it was airing hours after it did in the UK, so you might have been spoiled. It was cut up for commercials in the most awful ways. They did a terrible job cutting those episodes up for commercials. And it looked like shit because it was on cable, and everything on cable looked really, really bad. So I can speak, I think, for both of us, Sean, that mostly we had to pirate the episodes because no young people have BBC America, and even if we did, it was a shitty way to watch the show. So it was constantly, it would air in the UK, and then we would wait for a good torrent to come out, and then we would torrent it and then watch it that way. And being able to watch Doctor Who without jumping through those hoops, or being able to recommend Doctor Who to someone else without saying, by the way to watch this episode is to jump through 75 hoops. Now I can just say, yeah, it's where the Star Wars shows are. It's right there. It's in 4K. It's in Dolby Vision. You don't have to torrent anything, and you don't have to find BBC America in your cable package. We're eating well, finally, after many, many years of suffering.
Yes, and now also because Disney Plus is like the best service in so many ways. Like you get now, like, do you want to watch it with the Japanese language dub? Yeah, you want to watch Doctor Who in Chinese, motherfucker? Let's go. Like, that's one of my favorite things about Disney Plus I'd forgotten about. It's like, God, it's so easy to, if you want to, like, hear French Doctor Who for a second, you can just do that and watch. It's a fun way to rewatch certain scenes and get, like, all of that, because it's such an open feeling service with how that stuff works compared to a lot of other places.
Disney Plus definitely is the only streamer that feels like it was actually made as an app in the 2020s and not built on, like, 15-year-old technology. It is nice.
Yeah. But yeah, it just is it's a huge breath of fresh air, this coming back. And obviously, you know, we've had those other episodes, but there's something particular about getting just like a regular season of Doctor Who that it fully settled in my heart that like Doctor Who is actually back now. And it's not some weird one-time special episode thingy. It is a proper season of TV where we'll get a new episode every week, into late June. And that's a really good feeling.
Really good feeling. So before we break down these episodes individually, I think we should just talk about the number one, I think, article of interest here, which is the new Doctor himself, Ncuti Gatwa, who we talked about obviously with the Christmas special. Now we have 2 episodes seeing him as just, he's our normal Doctor. He's the guy in the theme song. He does not have a credits face yet. I think they need to fix that. They need to give us Ncuti Gatwa credits face, but other than that...
And a different one each episode with whatever his outfit and hairstyle is for that episode.
Yes. Yeah. I'm loving him, Sean. He is so fantastic. I think he has, and it's kind of interesting that he bi-generated with David Tennant, because he reminds me the most of David Tennant in this sense that he has hit the ground running. There's no build-up period. Just in Space Babies, that's his 2nd episode, 3rd if you count the giggle, and it feels like he's been doing this for years. Like, he just feels so comfortable in the skin of the Doctor. And then there's all, you know, there's so many crazy things he's doing with the role that are new and are fun. The number one thing being, and I know this comes from Ncuti Gatwa himself from interviews he's talked about with where he's worked with the costume designers, him having 1 or more new outfits every episode and them all being fly as shit is one of the coolest things that has ever happened to the Doctor, to the point that I'm surprised we haven't gotten more like this before. But I don't know if anyone else could have pulled it off the way he does.
Yeah, because it feels like we kind of... You know, I feel like the Peter Capaldi years leaned a little bit in this direction where he had a wider range of outfits. You know, like, because like David Tennant had like 2. Matt Smith mostly had 1 when he had the tweed jacket, but there's like, you know, very minor variations. And then he had
the blue jacket in his, you had
the big, you had the weird, bluish green jacket at the end of season 6. Oh, that was like a couple episodes. And then he had the big refresh season 7B. But Peter Capaldi, you know, I mean, the whole fashion changed season 9, and then it sort of had a wide variety of different sort of styles that fit in the overall aesthetic. But this is an even bigger diversion because it's not like, okay, every outfit is this kind of length cloak or coat with like a jumper and pants, right? Which all the Peter Capaldi outfits, while there's a wide variety of specific articles, they all fit into the same, here's the coat, that's this style, here's the shirt with like, without a tie or anything like that, with like the same style collar. This is like, the thing that unifies all of these outfits is that they are like very colorful and that they are fucking cool as shit, right? And that, you know, Ncuti Gatwa can pull all these looks off like nobody's business. But, you know, there's a similar kind of unifying underlying aesthetic that ties the costumes together. They all feel like things that this character would go pick out from his very eccentric wardrobe. But they are not the same kinds of costumes. They're not variations on the same costume. I mean, you really get that, obviously, in the Devil's Chord, where they go so far with the 60s shit. You know, it makes you embarrassed to go watch The Idiot's Lantern, an episode that's embarrassing in 1,000 different ways, but one where, like, they gave David Tennant, like, a slight pompadour, and that was their, like, and it's 50s now. And you look at this, it's like, well, they didn't just give Ncuti Gatwa a dope afro. Like, he has this whole fly blue suit and all this shit. Like, goddamn, boy. It's amazing. Yeah.
It looks like he's ready to walk into the greatest blaxploitation movie of 1978.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's like he's going to co-star in a Shaft movie or something. It's amazing.
And Ruby, too. Ruby's had some great looks as well. But, yeah.
Yeah, like the fashion is just incredibly on point, and it's one of those things about like when I talked about the production, like it infuses every part of the show, including the Doctor's outfit. And yes, so the Doctor's look is amazing, but a fit is only so much, right? It's the person who wears it that's what makes the outfit. And Ncuti Gatwa, we talked about this in his previous episode also, but he is just like a walking bag of charisma. Like there's that's the thing he has in common with David Tennant. It's the same quality as soon as in the Christmas Invasion, David Tennant wakes up at the end and comes out and does the whole speech that he's like, oh, well, that's from The Lion King and all that thing. It's just the charisma overwhelms you. And I would say it's even more so with Ncuti Gatwa. There's just a like natural sexiness to it, and a natural sort of, you just can't take your eyes off of him quality. That is incredible. And then here, though, you also get that infused with more sides of the Doctor that you see in the performance. Like you get a little bit more of like the darkness in places. You get the slightly more, not fully like manipulative is maybe a little bit far for what he's doing, but it's a little bit more on that edge, right? Where he's noticing things about Ruby and the coincidences and the things that are tying all these things together. Some of those things he's vocally sharing with Ruby, some of them he's not. And we're kind of watching him putting these pieces together. There's particularly a couple of scenes in Space Babies where you get that. And I like seeing those different facets. You see him, well, on the one hand, it's a little bit repetitive that we're like, okay, now we're at the genocide of the Time Lords again, because that's the hand we were dealt with fucking Chris Chibnall, because as part of the Timeless Child plotline was that the Master killed all the Time Lords. And I like that Davies is leaving it vague why there was another genocide. And if you're someone who hasn't watched Doctor Who in a long time, you would probably just assume it's the same genocide we were talking about previously. In case you didn't watch the Jodie Whittaker years, it is a different genocide. There has been a second genocide. It was a whole thing. They came back. Now they're gone again. But, it's a little bit eye-rolling that we have to be there again. But if we are there again, and that is where we are, that's the hand you were dealt with the show when RTD picked it up, and he's not trying to retcon the entire Chibnall thing, well, he pulls it off incredibly well. And he pulls it off in a way that feels different than David Tennant, that feels certainly different than Eccleston. Obviously, that character was so raw on it, where here you can feel that it affects him in the scenes where he talks about it. In Space Babies, you have the scene talking about Susan, which we'll revisit that. Obviously, that's a huge name drop. But you get the sense that he's affected by it. It's probably part of his motivation for this pursuit of freedom and always moving forward, this incredible sense of drive this version of the character has to just keep on pushing. But it is not sort of holding him down or holding him back in the same way it did for David Tennant. And I think he's able to play those shades so well because it communicates a lot of the emotions of the character in very simple scenes with very simple lines. So much of it is just through the way that Ncuti Gatwa carries himself and plays those scenes. You just, I think, get this access to a very rich interior psychology of the character.
Yes, and I think you didn't really have room for this in Church on Ruby Road because it's kind of all move, and it's more about Ruby than it is about him. But I think in these two, you also get that very doctorish sense that, oh, there's way more going on beneath the surface of this person than we grasp. He is older and more complex than like an individual human can really fathom because of the kind of infinite, lifespan that this guy has had over all these different incarnations and whatnot. There are things he plays close to the vest. There are things he is more open about, but there are mysteries there within the Doctor that are always kind of part of the appeal of the character, is that he's never quite fully knowable. We're never really in his head. The companion is the eyes through which we see him. And this Doctor is much more open and kind of emotionally mature than we've had in a while. But that quality, some of that is still there and is very fun to see. But yeah, you were mentioning the scene where he talks about the freedom of going out into the stars, and like, what a great, clip that out and put that in the reel of great Doctor Who like defining moments of like, who is the Doctor. That, and it's Space Babies does a lot of this where it's very consciously positioned as newcomer friendly, and I think that moment, for whether you've been watching the show forever or whether you're new, is a very good moment to kind of recenter what is our vision as a creative team of who the Doctor is. And I think it's it's tailored specific to Ncuti Gatwa's performance, but it also feels like any doctor could say that basic speech, and that is correct as to this is the psychology of the Doctor and what he stands for. Like, honestly, it sounds very similar to things I've heard you say, Sean, as a Doctor Who fan, about what appeals to you when you've, like, named it your favorite show in one of our top 10 lists or something. Really, really beautiful moment.
Yeah, it very much feels like, echoing one of the other moments from an RTD episode like that, where I think it's at the end of Rose, where the Ninth Doctor talks about how he can feel the turning of the Earth, right?
Yes.
And that whole concept, right? There's this sense of he is alien, right? And I think you really feel that here, that there's this like extra quality to him where he is experiencing things in a way that's like not quite the way that a human would see things. And then there's that little sparkle with Ruby where he kind of sees a bit of it in her as well. And that's what makes him want to bring her with him on his adventures. And that like just core dynamic of the Doctor and the companion, which is so essential. I just think like you get it nailed completely by the end of Space Babies. I think it was more or less there in Church on Ruby Road, but in particular in Space Babies, you get like, it's fully locked in. You see the sort of like incredible vastness of who this person, the Doctor, is, and this, desire not just to run away, but run towards something, some noble future, which is that sense of the freedom he's embracing here even more enthusiastically than I think normal. And the fact that Ruby also wants to go into that instead of just being scared shitless by it, because I think most people, in the way he delivers that scene, would be kind of scared shitless if he invited you, and so you should come with me. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, like no rent, no taxes, like that all sounds amazing. Also, like running headfirst into this like unknoble future in a world where, you have no home, you have no center, there's nowhere for you to go back to, which is also part of what he's saying. That's like kind of terrifying. And I think Ncuti Gatwa like sells that like that is all there underneath the surface, and that's maybe a part of also he's sort of running away from these things to a certain extent, and that like it is also scary, it is frightening, but there's something exciting and beautiful to it as well, right? And that's part of the complexity of the character and the life that he lives. And it's just, man, Ncuti Gatwa sells all of that, but also not by just like rehashing what other actors have done with the character. Like, it's so a unique and singular take. It feels like he is making the role his own in the way that the actor needs to, right? You really need to define who this Doctor is on that actor's terms and put their own spin on it. And man, Ncuti Gatwa, I mean, more than almost any actor, I mean, he hits the ground running. I mean, it's amazing how quickly you just kind of get wrapped up into who this character is.
Absolutely. The other thing that these two episodes highlighted that I think we got tastes of in his other appearances so far, but I think you really get here, he's fucking funny. He's really funny at this stuff. Like, the part that had me laughing hardest is the moment in Space Babies where you learn that the big boogie monster is literally a boogie monster, that it is made out of baby mucus. One of the grossest ideas in the history of Doctor Who. Maybe the grossest monster idea. You can fact check me on that, Sean.
I have to, just to point out, it is very similar to the season 9 episode Sleep No More, where in that monster is made out of dried mucus on, it's quote unquote sleep dust, that which is just dried mucus on your eyes that is dried there while you're sleeping. So it's very similar. They definitely though like dial it up just a little extra to make it particularly gross here, but it is weirdly similar to the monster from Sleep No More. Yes. When we went, 50 plus years of the history of Doctor Who without a single mucus monster, and then we got two of them in the span of like 5 years.
Yes. Okay. So that's debatable, but very gross. But that whole scene, I'm laughing my ass off because the way the Doctor is like holding himself back from laughing at the reveal, and he is both overjoyed in the way the Doctor is when he, encounters new exciting things, but also like his friend is covered in baby mucus, and that's fucking funny, and he can't resist it. But he also, he plays it so perfectly. It is a hilarious sequence, and there's a bunch of moments like that throughout both of these where his Doctor is just very, very funny.
Yes, no, absolutely. He sells the comedy incredibly hard. Although, but that was something where I think he just got so many huge laughs at the end of the giggle. That was maybe the thing on the character I was almost sold on the fastest was the comedy is so there. And it's both the physical comedy, but also, there's some very Capaldi-esque dry wit. You know, you have, I think the best gag in these episodes is the non-diegetic music piece in Devil's Chord, where she's like, you hear that music? You hear that music? And he's like, oh, I thought that was non-diegetic, which you can. Maybe it's a Scottish thing, but you can so hear Peter Capaldi saying that line and delivering it like in exactly the same way. And, they're both Scottish doctors. And maybe if David Tennant was allowed to use a Scottish accent, it would be the same thing. But there's the sarcasm. It's just so dialed in and so good. And so like the dryness of the delivery is fucking perfect. It's like a different kind of humor than like the big jumping enthusiastic stuff you get. You also get some of that dry humor in places. And I really enjoyed that.
Well, here's another Peter Capaldi connection. Capaldi is one of the first doctors who was asked to fairly regularly break the fourth wall.
Yes.
Starting in Listen is the first time he does that, but he does that several times where he'll have the like monologues where he literally just soliloquizes to the audience from inside the TARDIS and all of that. And that was very fun. And the Devil's Chord is like 3/4 of the way to being a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Like it is so far outside the fourth wall. And that is also something that, again, I don't think a lot of doctors could do that. I love Matt Smith. It's hard for me to imagine the 11th Doctor breaking the fourth wall. But like Ncuti Gatwa, immediately he's doing the non-diegetic joke, which is for the audience. It makes no sense in the context of the episode. At the end of the episode, he fucking winks at you. Like he is... You can imagine, like, he feels like a live-action Bugs Bunny in parts of these episodes in a way that I think is really hard to pull off, because the thing he has that Capaldi, being a little older, didn't is just the sheer manic physicality that is a little more 10th Doctor-esque or 11th Doctor-esque, but you combine that with that wit and that fourth wall break, and that's part of what makes this all feel so exciting, is that, like, if we're there in the Devil's Chord and that's his third episode, where do we go in his next season or the season after that? I feel like this character has some room to go off the walls in the most exciting ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially since, it just feels like he found the center for his character so quickly, it definitely makes it very exciting to see how that performance continues to evolve and how different writers come to it and stuff like that is also a thing I'm very excited for. But yeah, I mean, just like that core performance and the conceptualization of the character by Ncuti Gatwa and Russell T Davies. I mean, it's incredible. It's definitely, it's the thing you need. It's a shot of energy into this franchise that I think was very limping along by the time you got to the end of the Chris Chibnall years. And then obviously David Tennant, he's a classic at this point. Like you can bring him in and he can do his thing, but he can't carry the franchise forward. I mean, there is no more assured back we can ride on than Ncuti Gatwa's at this point. Like it just feels like you can rest the franchise on his shoulders. You also get the sense in like some of the behind the scenes things, if you watch it, of he's taking the other side of the role the actor has to play as a steward for the show. I think he's like doing a good job of like starting to adopt that role as well, which is one of those things I think like Peter Capaldi was like the best at. But the actor also has to be this person who does the interviews and like is the face of the behind the scenes stuff and carries the show to the audience both on set and off the set. And I think you're starting to see him acclimate to that role as well, and his enthusiasm for the entire production, his enthusiasm towards the fan base is fantastic. If you subscribe to the official Doctor Who YouTube channel, there's some good content on there that he's, fairly prominent on. And as soon as they switched over and they, you have the actor playing the Doctor, say, please subscribe to the official Doctor Who YouTube channel at the end. And now it's Ncuti Gatwa, and it feels right. It feels comfortable. And it's like, that's how you know that you're in a good place with your doctor, that I'm happy to get him signing me off when I watch a random clip on the Doctor Who YouTube channel now.
Love it. And this is something I was talking to one of our listeners on Twitter, who's also a big Doctor Who fan, Jamie. One of the things he said that I think is so true is to have a doctor who is like such a of the moment important male role model. And I think that's very true of what Ncuti is doing, in that the 15th Doctor is a very masculine doctor. And like forward facing, like in that way, and all the fashion and the choices and that kind of stuff, and comfortable in his body and all those things. But it is such a positive masculinity. It's such a loving. It is a complete counterpoint to all the men's rights pickup artistry bullshit that we have in the world and online today. That in places like TikTok and YouTube are eating young men alive. I'm really glad that Doctor Who has a central figure who I think is a great counterpoint to that kind of weird, awful pseudo culture we have going on around this, because I like that, and again, this is not in any way me saying it was bad that the Doctor was a woman for a couple of years or anything, right? But I'm saying that if the Doctor's going to be a man again, I'm glad that it feels like a very present tense version of defining masculinity for the 21st century, for the 2020s, feels of the moment. I think that's such a key part of what he's doing as the Doctor.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and you're right. It's like, this is not saying that like then this is why the Doctor should be played by a guy, right? Like this has always been when Peter Davison, the actor who played the fifth Doctor, was asked the question. This obviously before we had a female Doctor, whether we should have a woman play the Doctor or not. He was always against the idea, and he always gave the reason of this, that like the thing that the Doctor does is he's a very different kind of male role model on TV than the normal kind of male lead character you get in a TV show. Now, I think where that thinking is wrong is that then means that you can't have the Doctor do a similar kind of role for a female audience by having a female like an actress play the character. Like obviously you can
or that
do that.
Women can also be role models to men, right?
Yes, that element as well. But also that there's a different role that the Doctor can play that is equally as important if it's a actress playing the character. That's where I think Peter Davison's thinking was too narrow. But I think it is a good analysis, and I think it's true. And it's one of the things that attracted me to the show. I think particularly in high school, is there's something really kind of aspirational about the Doctor if you're someone who is turned off by violence and is not interested in the kind of traditional, markers of masculinity in socialization and things like that, and enjoys things that are a little bit more nerdy or weird or eccentric, bohemian, intellectual, right? And there's that world, that there is like this good moral person you can be and pursue those interests and kind of like eschew some of these like other more toxic elements of the way that you're gendered in society. Like that's the thing that the Doctor's character has always done, and appropriate for like the period in which he existed, right? And I think like the Tom Baker Doctor is particularly this for his period, right? In this like weird bohemian figure that shows you, is so against violence and is so kind of moral in more like intellectually and morally and ethically a strong person, and that's just so different than the kinds of action characters you're normally going to get in these sorts of stories. And yeah, Ncuti Gatwa absolutely feels like it's the same kind of thing, just for now the 2020s. And I think Christopher Eccleston did this. I think David Tennant did this. I think Matt Smith did this. I think Peter Capaldi did this. I think Jodie Whittaker tried to do this and was not able to do this, because I think she could have done it better if the scripts were better. But outside the show, she was able to do it. She was a good, that steward thing. She was able to do that. I don't know if like the plots of the show never let her kind of do that all the time.
Well, here's one thing I think was always a problem with the Chibnall writing for Jodie Whittaker, is that he was very afraid to write her as a woman. He was very afraid to engage with the idea that the Doctor had been a man for thousands of years, is suddenly in the body of a woman. There was no interrogation of what that meant. There was no interrogation of how the Doctor read their identity through a new lens of femininity. Whereas it does feel like with in the limited sample size we have already, with Russell T Davies writing and Ncuti Gatwa playing, there is with the 15th Doctor a sense of him being a man, him having this kind of queer affect, this kind of very, sexual is almost the wrong word, but he is sexy, he is hot, he is out in the world, right? And he is comfortable in his body in that way. That's part of what the fashion is about. The fashion, I think for some Doctors, the fashion could be a little bit of a disguise or something that they kind of hide behind, an affect. I think the 11th Doctor played into that a lot, right? With the bow ties and the fezzes and all of that stuff, because he was a little awkward. But this Doctor is wearing the fashion because he wants to fucking look cool, goddammit, and he looks cool. And I think that is all stuff that feels like it is absolutely like in conversation with the idea of masculinity as a dynamic concept. And I don't think we got that with Jodie Whittaker and femininity, even though I 100% believe she as an actress could have done that if the scripts had been there. This is why maybe next time you make the Doctor a woman, have more women in the writer's room. just to start, just one way to do it. But yeah, in any case, point is, we love Ncuti. great Doctor already. We should also probably talk about Ruby Sunday now that we have our companion doing normal companion things with Millie Gibson. And I think my all take so far is that I don't know if the character, like as written, is the most fascinating companion we've ever had, but I think the casting choice was 100% right, because I think she's very good feeding off and giving back the kind of energy Ncuti Gatwa is playing, and that is a hard thing to do.
Yes, yeah, I think she absolutely holds her own in these scenes. I think one of the things is neither of these episodes are hugely companion focused. You get more of it in Space Babies, but it's not like, and I was actually kind of surprised by this to a certain extent, it's not like old Russell T Davies or even really like RTD in the David Tennant mini season, where you had more of that anchoring in the home life. And we very well might get more of that. Obviously you do still have the scene where you come back to the mother in the end of Space Babies and stuff, where they destroy that roof. That poor roof has been through a fucking lot. I'm sure that will become a running joke, because that roof just gets fucked up every time they show up. So, I think there's more than enough space to flesh that stuff out more in the future, the way you got a lot with Rose, a little bit of lesser extent to Martha, but certainly a lot with Donna. I think there's space for that, but these two episodes don't really deal with it. These two episodes are more, big, crazy adventures where she has to do a lot of running down corridors, ask very, important exposition-style questions to the Doctor, right? This is a more kind of traditional companion role she's playing in order to get the story to function, and that's an important role that the companion plays, right? There's nothing wrong with having some episodes where that's what the companion does, because Doctor Who as a show has a lot on its plate. Sometimes what it has on its plate is a big, meaningful character arc for the companion character. Sometimes what it has on the plate is running through mucus-filled hallways, asking important exposition questions because there are fucking space babies we have to explain, and there's some crazy shit going on, and those are important things that this actress needs to be very good at doing and sell the character in the world through this more functional role. And I think she does a very good job of that. And in the moments where they stop and focus on her more, I do think there's a lot there. She sells an incredible gag when they do the whole butterfly thing and she turns into a weird Silurian style reptile monster, and she's some absolutely a weird Peter Davison era style companion where they would have had a chameleon or something, where they were around for one episode and they gave up because the prosthetics were too hard. And she's, but she just gives this very old 80s style Doctor Who performance of oh, well, Doctor, I never make mistakes. And if you should imply I'm making mistakes, should I then have to kill you? Or whatever she says, right? It's just this weird alien way she's speaking. When she's asked to do some of those more eccentric things, she does, I think, a very good job at it. And it makes me excited to see where they go with her overall story arc, and as we kind of learn more about the character later in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is interesting. We are, again, back to a thing that both RTD and Stephen Moffat loved in equal measure, which is the companion becomes something of a mystery. I don't say in equal measure. Moffat liked it more. Yes. But RTD did this. RTD did this as well, obviously, with Rose. Yeah. Less with Martha, but with Rose and Donna to a certain extent, of making the companion have some kind of mystery that is also central to the theme of the season. And I am definitely on the camp of, I would like to see more normal companions who have no kind of extra plot thing going on. To be fair to Chris Chibnall, he did give us that. He just did it in the form of the most boring companions in the history of the show. So, maybe he doesn't get points for that. But, so we'll see. It all depends on how good the payoff is. What I do like, and I think this comes back to how is RTD making lemonade out of the lemons that Chris Chibnall left, is the whole adoption kind of theme of the show, and that we are pairing these characters and we are pairing the mystery of who Ruby Sunday is in through the whole lens of adoption. And I think it continues to be done well. It continues to feel sensitive, and I also think, and this is true in all the things that he's picking up from Chibnall, the adoption thing, the Last of the Time Lord stuff, he's never referring to it in the scripts through the specific gobbledygook of what happened in the Chibnall years. It's much more the light thematizing that we're pulling out in such a way that if you didn't see the Chibnall years, I think you could assume the adoption stuff for the Doctor isn't in the and the Doctor was the one true chosen one who had all the powers, and they're not talking about any of that. They're talking about him being taken in by the Time Lords, which I think always could have been a decent story to tell with the Doctor. We talked about this in the 60th specials. There's nothing in the Doctor's history that says he couldn't have been adopted or something like that, right? Like that actually kind of makes sense given his entire personality type and deal, right? And so I think all of that is being played really well. And even though the Last of the Time Lords thing, it kind of annoys me to be back to that. You know, it's hard to complain when Ncuti is playing those lines so beautifully, and then Murray Gold comes in on the soundtrack and brings in a theme from Series 3 of the show, which is almost 20 years old. And it's like, how many shows have music libraries that rich that you have a composer that can just seamlessly weave that in and then go back into the original music? It works.
Yeah, and yeah, it's the thing I'm honestly most impressed by from a writing perspective is how RTD is just kind of stunting on Chris Chibnall at a certain point with like how much better he is at doing this shit. Because man, Chris Chibnall, I think when you dig down, his entire run on the show was about the Timeless Child stuff. He didn't actually bring it in the forefront until partway through his second season. But, I mean, there are little, like, implications of it in his first season, in Ghost Monument, his second episode. The episode where you already knew we were in a bad place. It didn't take very long. There's some, like, Timeless Child talk and stuff like that there. So I think it's clear, and obviously, you know, if people who know, Chris Chibnall himself was adopted. So that's part of where the idea comes from. And I don't want to deny him those experiences and how he's felt about that and wanting to express that in his art. But I don't think he was good at it because I think it was too wrapped up in so much other stuff. And if the point was meant to explore like feelings around being adopted and how that like changes the way you look at yourself and should it change the way you look at yourself and all these kinds of questions, very legitimate questions that lots of art has dealt with, that stuff gets diluted when it gets wrapped up in a chosen one narrative and a redux of the genocide of the fucking Time Lords and the Master showing up and all that stuff. I mean, it's so incredibly busy. And then you blow up the entire universe with the Flux and you're like trying to do all that. And, you know, as far as we know, the universe is still 80% destroyed or whatever the number is that never technically got wrapped up. So, you know, as far as we know, that just happened. You know, like there's so much shit in there that it's so incredibly hard to read, or it's not just read in an intellectual sense, more importantly, to feel the themes around adoption and that soul searching. It's just not done well. And so it's crazy how smoothly RTD just locks into that in a way that it's like you could just do these episodes without there having been the entire Chibnall era. If you cut that out and erased it from history, please do. It would be very nice. But if you did that and you just watched Space Babies and the Devil's Chord in sequence after the Peter Capaldi stuff, right? You would just be like, oh, this is them just kind of putting a word to a thing you already felt in things like Listen and Hellbent, when Moffat looked back and kind of got a little bit closer to the Gallifrey stuff. You know, you have that big flashback, or not flashback, I mean, they go back in time, but to the Doctor's past where Clara hides under the bed, right? And you hear the Doctor as a kid. Like, if you say that, like, and that kid is adopted and he's not living with his parents, right? Which is clearly kind of an implication there. He's at least not living with whoever his parents are, right? That just feels like a very natural thing, development of the character that honestly is in line with a lot of like general implications throughout a lot of the series. If you think about the fact that there are lots of things in the classic series that imply that being a Time Lord is not necessarily a biological thing, it is a thing that you become. Right? Like the Seventh Doctor, if the series had not been canceled, was going to turn Ace into a Time Lord, quote unquote, like bring her to Gallifrey, have her enter the Time Lord Academy, presumably to become a Time Lord. You know, you have Gallifreyans living on Gallifrey, you learn in the Invasion of Time, that are not Time Lords. So there's a clear implication that there's experiences you go through, exposure to the time vortex, whatever the fuck it is, that turns somebody into a Time Lord. And that there's a distinction between just being Gallifreyan and a Time Lord, like that, I think slots into a lot of these ideas as well. And so the adoption thing just like fits perfectly. You don't have to worry at all about, and then I'm also where they got time travel technology and regeneration from, and then I've got 500 lifetimes I've lived before the William Hartnell version and like all that stuff. If they never touch on that and it just leave it at the adoption thing, like, great. Like, this is a great story to tell with this character.
Yes.
You know, it's not just a, like, you know, we're, you know, sort of like retconning things and trying to pretend it never happened. This truly is making lemonade out of the lemons you've been given. It's making something that's like a really great story to be told out of a starting point that could potentially be the most disastrous thing in the history of Doctor Who from a like overall setting perspective for the narrative. Getting rid of those little kind of bits that we don't need and that hurt things, and just keeping the kernel that feels like the kernel that Chibnall really always wanted deep down in there. Finding that, bringing that out, and making it part of the character. Like, that's a cool way to respect where Chibnall tried to go and where the show did go to certain extents, while also bring the show forward in a way that feels really powerful and get to tell a new story. And the way that it's woven in together with Ruby's story is just, that's perfect. And it's exactly the thing you'd expect RTD to be very good at, that piece of it. But he is just as good at it here as he has ever been with writing the Doctor-companion relationships.
Yes. It is, I said this on Twitter, it is the difference between introducing lore and telling a story.
Yes.
Telling a story can involve lore. The problem with the Chibnall era is primarily that he wasn't telling stories, he was introducing lore. And that just kind of fucks with stuff. If you want to tell a story, this is what it actually looks like. And, this is the reason Russell T Davies is a better storyteller and probably a better person than you or I. Because my instinct after Chibnall would have been, as I've made the joke before, of Jodie Whittaker wakes up, it was all a dream, and then she trips and falls and regenerates like the Sixth Doctor did into the Seventh, trips on the TARDIS and bangs her head, and we just erase that whole era. That would have been my instinct. And I think it probably would have been yours too, Sean.
Yes, although in that metaphor or that comparison, it wouldn't even be Jodie Whittaker, it would just be Ncuti Gatwa in a blonde wig, and that would be a pretty hard one to sell. It was already hard when it was like Sylvester McCoy, who looks like he's like 2/3 the height of Colin Baker. It'd be a lot harder with Ncuti Gatwa, though.
Indeed. But anyway, yes, that's what it would be. But I think RTD kind of took this more empathetic approach to saying, okay, this is what was told. I'm not going to erase what this person, who he probably likes on an interpersonal level, Chris Chibnall.
They've worked together.
And they know each other. They've worked together. Okay, I'm not going to shit on everything he did. I'm going to take it and I'm going to, again, take lemons and make lemonade. And it is a very loving approach to the show, to the people who've made it. And I do think ultimately much healthier for the series than my idea of it was all a dream. Ncuti Gatwa in a blonde wig regenerating into Ncuti Gatwa.
Yeah, because the Chibnall era has fans. I don't understand their lives or how they see the world, but they're out there, and they're fans of Doctor Who, just that are looking at her and maybe enjoy different things. But, there's no reason to shit on them and the things that they like. They like what they like. That's fine. And so, it's nice to be it's very inclusive. That if you watched that era, it's not, taking every little detail of it and making it very important, but it is bringing forward lots of the ideas from Whittaker's era on the show and Chibnall's era on the show. And it's keeping it part of the overall flow of the story. And you can just keep on moving along with it. And hopefully the people who are fans of the Chibnall era can then acquire some more sophisticated taste in media as they watch better stories.
Indeed. I like how you started that being very generous to the fans and ended it being a little less generous, but that's okay.
Okay, I watched it all, Jonathan. Okay,
I know you
didn't even
did.
Watch all of it, so I earned the right to be a little snarky towards that shit, because, oh my god, it was not good.
All right. Sean, let's talk about these episodes individually. Space Babies, I don't think there's a ton to talk about with this one. I mean, it fits into an archetype of a Doctor Who story so clearly that it's directly reworking past RTD episodes, most notably the End of the World episode from season 1, which is the first one with Rose in the TARDIS after the episode called Rose. And I mean, literally it redoes whole scenes like them looking out at the planet and him using the sonic screwdriver to make the phone be able to call the mom, although now it is not an old flip phone, now it is a modern smartphone, which made me feel old because I'm just thinking about how much time, and I'm like, oh, when Rose and the Doctor were doing that, this girl Millie Gibson was 1 year old, because they keep saying that she was, or I don't know when Millie Gibson was born, but Ruby Sunday was born in 2004, they keep telling us. In any case, so
that's about how old Millie Gibson is as well.
Yeah, yes. It makes me feel really old.
She's like 20 or something.
I know. Anyway, So it's redoing those scenes directly. Obviously, the story is different, although it is the kind of story you always get in kind of the, especially in the RTD model, which Stephen Moffat largely picked up for a lot of his episodes of the companion's first adventure in space. I think the difference between this and something like The End of the World or the
Beast Below is the other
yeah.
one this gave me big vibes from
Yeah.
as another second episode. If you think
Yes.
of Church on Ruby Road as like really the first episode, because it kind of is,
yeah.
this is basically the second episode, which is your space episode where you get the companion and you get like a kind of sympathetic alien thingy.
Yes.
They're pretty similar.
The big difference, I will say, is that this one is much more silly and madcap than some of those, right? Like, this does not... The Beast Below reaches... And I think it maybe reaches a little too early in Matt Smith's tenure to do this effectively, but it reaches for, like, a big dramatic ending with him having to consider the plight of the beast and all this stuff. This one technically hits a similar beat in that the Doctor has to save the mucus monster, but it is a mucus monster, and the episode knows that it's... Like, that is one thing that I think makes this episode work, is that if this were any less winking about how stupid it is, it would be unbearably twee in the way like Baby Geniuses is or something. But like, I think because it has the tone pretty well modulated, it is a lot of fun, even though I think it's not the most, dense episode of Doctor Who that we've seen. But it works for what it's trying to do, I think, pretty effectively.
Yeah, it can be twee in places, or certainly like saccharine is kind of the word I was thinking of as well. It gives you flashbacks to that particular kind of 90s, early 2000s kid movie that had like babies, and with like CG mouths and shit like that. There are moments where like I think the baby stuff works for me, and there are moments where it definitely goes over the edge. As with like all stuff we're using babies, it's just kind of like it's a difficult thing, I think, to do and put like a big spotlight on, because it's just such a primal human, there's something like deep in your like biology as a mammal at a certain point when you're looking at like these babies, and when it focuses on it so much, it makes it hard, I think, to really fully integrate it as a story. But it does work more often than I think actually I would have expected. Like, because I had no idea what to expect going in. I didn't even realize the episode was called Space Babies until the episode title came up. I'm like, that's a weird title. And then we got to the actual babies. I'm like, like literally, like, okay, like like space babies, like babies in space, like actual babies. Okay. But there are definitely some moments that work for me. There's something about the, whatever they're doing with the babies, I think there clearly are actual babies there, but there's also obviously lots of like CGI supplements or whatever they're doing to execute these effects. It's just janky enough to actually kind of work for me. Like,
yes,
I love the Eric baby, because that baby just has the most baby expression on his face, that he's just like, he looks kind of slightly displeased with everything that's happening. It's not happy giggly baby. So even when he's saying things like, "I'm so happy, Rose, I love you," it still just sort of like looks like he's about to pass gas, and that makes it better. I think it makes it work more.
They're not trying to make the babies act.
Yes.
They're letting the babies be babies, and then they finish it all in post, but they leave enough of the babies are just being babies that it is uncanny and weird. And I think that is, you have to steer into that with something like this. You can't try to actually sell me on the reality of this, because it's just impossible. I also think the commitment to having Ncuti Gatwa correct himself every single time in the episode he says babies to being space babies, because he is so, and this just makes sense for the Doctor, is so excited at the concept of space babies. That is a gift that keeps on giving. That is genuinely funny every time it happens.
Yes. If there's one change I would make with the baby stuff, it's that I would have the Doctor be a bit more 12th Doctor Peter Capaldi-ish with it, because I think if it was a Peter Capaldi episode, which, man, if Space Babies, if it was Peter Capaldi, my God, he would talk to the babies like they're just regular people. And I kind of wish the Doctor did that. Like, I wish the Doctor didn't baby them as much and saw them more as, I mean, I get that they're not old enough to be adults, but they are not mentally and emotionally actually really babies anymore. They have aged and they have experiences. You don't want to think too much about the biology of it, because really, if they haven't actually physically grown, they shouldn't probably really be able to retain memories in the way that they do and things like that. But you could just ignore all that and wave all that away and assume that they have been able to develop into effectively an 8-year-old or something in a baby's body. And I wish that the Doctor acted a little bit more mature or adult around them, and then Rose or Ruby was stuck just looking at them as little babies, and that was it. And I think that would have a contrast there would have made some of those scenes not be quite as on the like, can I really accept this? Is it too saccharine? Is it too twee? I think if you had more sardonic Doctor treating them like they're just little guys and gals, and that's it, just like talking to them, I think that would have helped me sell some of those scenes that spend so much time on the baby stuff.
I agree with that completely, and I think it could be fun to see what would Ncuti Gatwa's version of that be versus Capaldi's, because Capaldi's would be like he'd be a little short with them, and it might be it would come across as rude, even though the Doctor isn't intending to be necessarily, and I don't think Ncuti Gatwa's would be that, but it would be more, again, he's talking to them like people, and I think especially when you have Ruby Sunday, who she's good with babies already in the fiction because her mom adopts or takes care of adopted kids, and so she has spent her life helping her mom care for other babies, so it makes sense she's good with them. You don't need both of them to be good with babies. It would be more dramatic if the Doctor was a little more uneasy with the kids, and she was the more mature one there because she's been established as that.
Yeah, so I think a little bit of contrast there in the narrative would have worked nicely. But, there's a whole side to the episode that I kind of wish it went deeper on, although it would have just made the episode way darker. But there's a very dark backstory that that the episode is not about, but it brings up that is very like, against like anti-abortion laws, I guess, like it's because there's a whole thing of, oh, we have this station that is made to create babies, but then all the adults had to abandon the station, but because of the way these sort of like pro-lifestyle laws are designed, the babies have to be born. And so you can't terminate the like artificial pregnancies or whatever in the station. And so these babies just have to be born, but they're also not going to spend the money to take care of the babies. So they have just made this baby station in space that is permanently making babies that those babies would just be born and die in those tubes, and it would just make another round of babies, which is a very dark but very poignant and kind of powerful metaphor for, especially if you're living in America, like the trend that has been happening in America since we got rid of Roe v. Wade. As someone who's living in Texas, I'm very aware of how all these things are working down here, where those laws are all going and the kind of horrifying consequences they have, and the just utterly inhuman hypocrisy at the heart of it, of them saying, oh, we care about the life of these children, and that's why you can't terminate the pregnancy at any point, and you have to force these women to give birth to these babies, and yet these are the same people that are fighting against all kinds of welfare and healthcare style policies that are designed to take care of families and take care of those babies when they are born. And it's just like the hellish reality that we are living in currently, with the way that the politics have shifted on all that stuff in terms of what has been implemented in our government. Even though the vast majority of actual people living in America all think this is horrifying, it's a whole thing. But I think like the metaphor in here that they present is really apt and powerful. And I understand why it's not really what the story is about, because it would be fucking heavy. But it is such a strong idea for a sci-fi story that I kind of wish, maybe RTD can write like a short story or something that is just like the hardcore version of this, that actually makes that the front and center thing that dives deeper into that element, because I think it's very smart how he's designed it. But it is also very chilling.
But this is also where some of it, like, I think that's true. And then there's also there's an immigration angle with refugees in the episode, where there's the refugee planet and they talk about all that. And I agree that I feel like there are threads that I wish the episode pulled on more. And at the same time, I felt very cozy and at home, because that is true of like every RTD episode from his original run at a certain point, is that he very frequently likes to drop in bits of social critique that are not actually what the episode is about, but they kind of dance around the edges. And some of his better episodes go in on that more fully. And I think even some of the ones we've gotten in these last 2 years have. But this felt it reminded me of a lot of early like Eccleston and Tennant episodes, where like you'll get that on the side, but the episode won't wind up being about it, even if the episode might have been better for it. Where you can see he's always thinking about these things and wanting to put them in, but they're not necessarily the thing that the episode winds up being interested in.
Yeah, like New Earth has some of that with healthcare stuff. Gridlock has a lot of that. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of older RTD episodes that have that similar kind of thing. And hey, I'll take my good metaphor in the setting and in the background that sort of underpins things. Like, the episode is way better for having that stuff, even if it can be a little bit disappointing to not see it explored to its potential.
I agree. And it is, and I think specifically it is better than the Chris Chibnall, there just are no ideas. Or the idea is the doctor loves Amazon and hates the workers.
Yes, like the Chibnall version of this would be like, oh man, this baby station is great. And we should just like, I mean, really, it'd be doing a bit much if we tried to help them here. I mean, I think the babies will be fine if they're on their own. I mean, they've got this nice nanny lady here. Anyways, let's go, Yaz, and then they leave.
Or it would be, we should create our own baby tubes on the TARDIS.
Exactly.
So it's these, in our terrifying crystal cave TARDIS thing.
Yes, crystal babies. Let's go.
Oh, God. Okay. We should probably stop making fun of the Chibnall episodes at some point and talk about the new stuff, but that's okay. All right. Anything else to say about Space Babies?
It's a pretty good episode. I enjoyed it.
The monster was effectively disgusting, but also I think that is one. We should just say again, all the special effects are so good. That like practical boogeyman model that they were using looked really good. And by really good, I mean really gross. But also in the scene where like it's dying, you felt for it. Like they designed it in just enough of a way, because it's a very H.R. Geiger alien-esque monster, but it has enough of kind of like a face that you did feel like, oh yeah, they shouldn't, the doctor is right, they shouldn't kill this thing, even if it is viscerally disgusting to me as a human being. The doctor, in his bigger awareness of what a species is correct in saying we should not kill this thing. I
mean, it's because it is a fair point if you stop and think about it. I mean, it's like, yes, it's very gross, but have you ever put yourself in the boogie monster shoes? It's like a monster made out of baby boogers. Like that's a pretty miserable existence. You really gotta fucking kill it and shoot it out into space. Like, can't we try to make Booger Monster happy? Because if you were a Booger Monster, man, I would be fucking shit up on the regular. I would be pissed. I would be ripping your space station up. I would be making a mess of shit, because it's like, what the fuck have you done to me, God? Like, let's just destroy the world. Would be my mission statement until someone showed me kindness.
It is true. The thing about Space Babies is that it is only degrees away from being a really horrifying David Cronenberg movie.
Yes,
and having, Jeff Goldblum play the character yelling, "Kill me!"
Yes, yeah. God, yeah. It is true. Like, it is like 2 or 3 steps away from being a Fly-esque horrifying movie. If you leaned all the way into the weird, like the abortion law stuff in that metaphor, you leaned all the way into the Booger Monster, there is a really horrifying, like, body horror movie you can make out of this shit.
Maybe good thing that they didn't go quite that far. Especially because they're trying to expand the audience. All right. The Devil's Chord, the second episode from the new season that aired this week. And just straight up one of the most formally experimental episodes Doctor Who has ever done. We've got fourth wall breaks. We have all these experiments with sound and with silence. We have a lot of things with the diegesis just disappearing in scenes, because our villain is another essentially incarnation of the Toymaker and those powers, very much following on from everything we got in the Giggle last year. And just, I think the thing about this episode that just jazzed me up so much is that it feels like it is so free to do whatever the fuck it wants. Like, this is an episode of Doctor Who that is drunk on the possibilities of this series in a way that, like, I love from Doctor Who. I love when Doctor Who embraces the idea that there are no actual limits to what Doctor Who can be. I love any time that Doctor Who goes down that path, and this is about as far down that path as I think a single episode has ever gone, to the degree that, like, this feels way more like a Big Finish experimental story off on the edges in the audio dramas than an actual episode that looks like one of the more expensive episodes in this show's history because of the production values.
Yeah, no, it absolutely, this is the sort of, like, statement of intent, I think, from Davies. Like, it is this is where we're trying to go, and it's making good on the implications you got from Giggle and from Church on Ruby Road, right? Of this move towards, let's go for more kind of fantasy, but like a very odd notion of fantasy, right? It's fantasy in the sense of, like, the rules are malleable. Things don't fit into clearly defined boxes. There are no lines here. Everything is mercurial in nature, and it can shift and change under your feet. And that's kind of all over the place. I mean, you have the that scene in Space Babies that is also playing with this. You have two big scenes in Space Babies that play with this. You have the moment where she steps on the butterfly and turns into a Silurian human thing, which is not how time travel has ever been implied to work in Doctor Who. And the Doctor makes this joke about like, oh, I need to activate the butterfly compensator. But I feel like the implication of that joke was less there's actually a butterfly compensator and more like the laws of reality are not as firm in the Doctor Who universe as they used to be because the Toymaker became loose in our universe, right? That's like a specific stated plot point in the Giggle that they hold on for a little bit is this notion of, oh, the Toymaker and this godlike entity entering our universe has made our universe less stable. And so time travel works in a less stable way because then also later in Space Babies, you have that moment where that their current time and this memory of the church on a Ruby Road conflate on top of one another. And like the Doctor is in that moment and the snow comes through, which I think is a great scene. And the implications of all this are very interesting. And so that's where coming into the Devil's Chord, they just take those little implications we've had with the goblins and all the Giggle and all that shit, and they just run, a fucking marathon with it. And we are in a very different place with Doctor Who than we were before the Devil's Chord. You've got Maestro, who is the Doctor just calls them a god, right? So we have this god character that is a child of the Toymaker, that is the seemingly like incarnation of music and has control over music and sound in its entirety and can like eat a person's music and can eat music, which is not a concept that exists or makes any kind of sense. Sound is just vibration and airs, like in the air. Music is not like a physical thing as such. It's a pressure wave. So it's like it's a conceptual entity, which is why like the Doctor cannot seem to be able to do anything, and they work on weird kind of play conceptual logic rather than actual rules and laws of physics. And I think that's just an interesting place to take Doctor Who, because Doctor Who is flexible enough as a piece of fiction that it can do this, because it's leaned into this place in places, particularly in like old Doctor Who. The Celestial Toymaker, the original one, is an example of this. You've also got, oh god, I'm blanking on the story. There's the second Doctor story where he ends up in the land of fiction, where that storyline is also just bonkers and is about he has entered a different universe. That universe operates on the laws of fiction and like reality can bend on a whim. And so the Doctor Who's the franchise has played in this space, and there's something cool about that space just coming in to the home base of Doctor Who. This is just a regular episode, seemingly, and just fucking it all up. And the way they present it is fascinating, because at first you think it's just going to be a regular historical episode with, like, we're going to go visit the Beatles and do, like, a Beatles episode, the way we did a Shakespeare episode or a Dickens episode, or, they've always done, like, one of these a season, basically. Let's go do a Beatles episode. And then, like, after, other than the cold open, it seemingly is a normal historical, and then the Maestro shows up and everything just goes completely insane, and the whole Beatles episode thing goes out the window. Like, that is not really what this is about. It is something very different and very bizarre.
And it's better than any of those historicals.
Yes.
Like, that's the other thing, is that those all suck. The ones you were just naming. Like, the Shakespeare episode is maybe the worst episode of the RTD run. Like, it is abysmal to watch. And how much better would the Shakespeare episode have been if he went to find Shakespeare, Shakespeare started talking gibberish, and then a god came out, and he and Martha had to fight the fucking god with the power of music? This is rad as hell. And it is so playful. It is so light on its feet. It's so inventive. It feels like truly limitless in what they are willing to try and willing to do. Like, there are multiple full set pieces that have no dialogue. There is Ruby playing the piano on the roof that is just, we start seeing everyone around the city hear music again for the first time, and I love that idea of, like, how dark would a world without music be, and the way they make that literal. You have the scene where they are underground hiding from Maestro, and Maestro is using the, like, tuning fork, but the Doctor is using the sonic to, like, mute all the sound, and you have all of that. You have the final fight between them in the, like, rehearsal space where the Doctor is playing on the Abbey Road piano, and that is just a fully musical, no dialogue, big kind of epic fantasy battle that they are having. It kind of reminded me of the scene in Doctor Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, the best scene in that movie, where
Yes.
the Doctor Strange fights with the music notes, but it's extended to like a full episode. There's a very Sam Raimi, like gonzo quality to it in that sense. And then you end the episode just on a full fucking, essentially non-diegetic, maybe diegetic, impossible to know musical number in the style of a big 60s pop song. And so the episode is just wildly formally playful. There's the aforementioned fourth wall breaks and everything. There's the diegetic play with that the score is just in this show for a little bit there. Like, this would be a genuinely teachable example of like sound design in film if you're teaching a film studies class. And I'm blown away by it every step of the way, and I love how willing it is to go that far out on the limb, and it feels like a natural step because we had the giggle, because Wild Blue Yonder was actually really kind of the start of this with like pushing out to the edge of the universe and things get really weird. And then you had the giggle, you had Church on Ruby Road with the big goblin musical number and everything that happens there, and the big ship that they are on, and the language of the threads and the knots and everything. And then you get here, and it just feels like, oh, okay, we are making a firm break. This is a new era of Doctor Who, not just in the production team and the actor, but in its entire kind of stance towards the fiction. And another thing, when I was going back and forth with Jamie on Twitter, is he noted that like maybe this is part of the reason why RTD has written most of the episodes this season. The only ones that aren't him are the next episode, which is Stephen Moffat, and when we get to episode 6, that's Kate Herron and Brianni Redman wrote that one. And I wonder if part of it is because RTD is trying to establish this is what Doctor Who is now. And we can't just have people come in and write an episode of Doctor Who that they would have written for someone else 5 years ago, because it's a different valence, and we're trying to kind of establish that. And I think he's done a phenomenal job in 6 episodes getting us to this place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is probably one of the main reasons why RTD needs to do these episodes. Like, because he's aestheting a very different style and tone. I mean, it's the most dramatic shift of that, like, I think really we've maybe ever had in the show. I mean, you know, obviously you have like, it's a pretty harsh shift when you get to the John Nathan Turner stuff in that last 4th Doctor season. You go to fucking E-Space, it's like that, the show gets very weird, and it's just very different very quickly. But that's like the only other time in the show, other than obviously you have, if you're counting the move from Classic Who to New Who, but that's almost a different sort of jump because the show is off the air for so long. But if you're going,
you could argue that the 2nd to 3rd Doctor jump, which moves kind of the genre a little more to like a workplace show, but even then you had all the unit episodes with the 2nd Doctor to kind of prepare you for that shift. It's just that becomes the status quo. That also moves to color, which changes things a bit. But like, that's probably that and the John Nathan Turner switch are probably the closest. Certainly New Who has not made a shift like this at all.
Yes. I mean, it's pretty intense because it's just a different kind of sort of genre at a certain point. It's just much less sci-fi oriented. I mean, honestly, the thing they need to do, they need to get fucking Neil Gaiman back, you know?
Yes,
he did Doctor's Wife.
I was thinking this.
That's the thing that this like feels like. It feels like his Sandman comics. It's that kind of like strange sort of fairy tale-esque fantasy, but with a very modern twist on it, where you get this sense that there is this like narrative logic. What we would consider narrative logic is the actual fabric of the logic of diegetically the universe of the show, right? That normally we think of narrative logic as being a non-diegetic thing. It is a thing that we as a reader and as writers impose upon this piece of fiction in order to create it. But within the world of the fiction, the narrative logic is not narrative logic. Like, their world works the way that our world works, or there might be some exceptions for rules of magic or something. But the coincidence, which is narrative logic, right? Narrative logic tells us that these characters must be related to each other on some sort of fundamentally narrative-driven level. Both these characters are adopted. That is why they need to travel together, because that allows us to explore this theme of adoption, right? This is kind of what I mean by narrative logic. There are narrative demands that exist that serve as the underlying fabric that weaves the entire world of the story together in the way that our world is woven together by laws of physics and space-time and things like that. That's the thing that rules pieces of fiction in their world, but within the logic of their world, they don't see it. They just think of their world as a world that exists in regular space-time or whatever. That's where we're changing, is that This feels like in the world of the narrative, their world is dominated by narrative logic. The Doctor's life is now dominated by narrative logic. His connections to Ruby and her connection to him, their relationship to the world and the places that they are visiting are within the world of the show, happening because of narrative logic. These are like not actually coincidences. These are driven by some kind of purpose that the Doctor is like investigating, but it seems like it is not a purpose driven by like an intelligent entity. It is just the nature of the world they live in. They are drawn towards these points of interesting connection and coincidence that allows the story to be driven forward. And it's just a very interesting way to construct this sort of like more like kind of postmodern meta style piece of fiction that Neil Gaiman was just incredibly good at. And if you have not read the Sandman graphic novels, they'd be a good read if you want to see something else that's in this tone and style, because they get into a lot of this kind of stuff, because that's the Sandman is the king of dreams. That story works on dream logic, where dreams are very real and they have real power, and the difference between a dream and reality is nothing. Like they're both the same thing. And so this is kind of working on a similar kind of style, and I'm just way into it. I think it's just a cool approach. It's a very rare style of fantasy fiction, and I think Russell T Davies has been very good at it because it's sort of colliding into the more logic fused kind of sci-fi valence that Doctor Who normally takes. It gives it this very different style. So it is the like natural extension of all the weird rope technology that the Goblins used. That is the same thing that is bringing us to 1963, which is also, of course, the year that Doctor Who as a show became a thing. So the Doctor talking about that he exists out there and Susan exists out there. But of course, also like Ruby and her past is connected to all of this. Her playing the piano and her relationship to music is connected to everything that is happening. And then that leads into when the Maestro tries to destroy her or whatever, you know, there's so much in her as a person that starts coming out, and there's all that mystery and everything. But all of it is connected to this weird kind of narrative, dreamlike logic that fuels the show at this point. And it's awesome. It's rad. I'm way into it. I'm very excited to see what Russell T Davies does to develop this style and tone. And I'm also very excited to see what Stephen Moffat does with it too, because he leaned a bit in this direction, but he did not go this far with it, certainly in his tenure on the show.
It does feel like that's probably why Moffat is one of the other people writing the season, because I feel like RTD could explain this to him very quick and say, this is what I'm going for, and Moffat would go, yes, that sounds exciting, let me see what I can do, right? Like, I can imagine Moffat taking to this really quickly, and that's exciting to see. But yeah, it's awesome. They absolutely need to get Neil Gaiman back, because, like, honestly, if anything it holds back Neil Gaiman's 2 episodes he's done so far, it's that he can't quite push all the way in that direction. I think that really holds back Nightmare in Silver probably more than the Doctor's Wife. But, like, yeah, obviously you can't force Neil Gaiman to write for Doctor Who, but if RTD has not put the call out yet, he is a crazy person. That is something that needs to happen, at least the request.
Yes, because they've also got more of the budget for it, because that obviously was the other big thing with The Doctor's Wife, is that they mugged all the other episodes and gave their budget to The Doctor's Wife in order to make that episode.
Yes, I mean, that episode got moved around so fucking much just to get it made, because it was so out there. But yeah, absolutely. And I feel like there's a lot of different kinds of writers you could invite in who probably would not have been a good fit for Doctor Who before, and now would be, and that is exciting. The thing about The Devil's Chord is that how often can you say with a new episode of Doctor Who, you're going through it, and at a certain point you're like, I don't know, I don't have any idea what's going to happen. I don't have any idea what kind of the rules of this thing are. Like, in the broad stroke, is the Doctor probably going to save the day? Yes. But, like, other than that, it feels completely out there. Like, the other episode probably in modern Who that feels that way is something like a Heaven Sent, some of the, like, really, like, great Stephen Moffat ones that feel like they take a really experimental valence. But generally, I don't think we get to go this far with it. And it's awesome. And it is also just such a fun, playful episode. It is funny and it is crazy and it makes you gasp. And then at the end, the Doctor winks at the camera and we jump into a full choreographed musical number that looks more expensive than anything else in the episode. You've got like 100 bodies dancing on screen in all these different shots, and the song is really fucking catchy. And it's the second musical number in Ncuti Gatwa's 3 episodes so far. They know what they are doing. This is great.
Yes. I will say that personally, I didn't think the song itself was particularly good. Like, I don't know if I would actually call it catchy for me personally. Although I also don't think the song being good is actually important. I think the song is a bit...
Sure.
It's a bit rough around the edges, but it also is not really like the point of that sequence. There's something kind of... It's almost like the baby effects in Space Babies. Like, it being a little bit of a janky feeling song is almost kind of the point. It does feel conspicuous that there's no actual Beatles music. I suspect that there's like right stuff around that and things like that. But it is, is that thing where I kept on being like, when are they going to do a like Please Please Me or something like that? Like, when is an old Beatles song going to get played here? And then slowly I realized, oh wait, right, okay, yes. I mean, you can't just do Beatles music. There's more to it than that.
They could play one of the songs the Beatles covered in '63. Yes. They just couldn't play the actual Beatles master because even Disney ain't got that kind of money. You know? Yeah.
The other thing with the episode, though, you have to shout out is I think the villain Maestro, played by drag queen Jinx Monsoon. I usually don't go in for these kinds of super over the top villains, but with the concept of this villain and the very, I mean, using the word camp doesn't even describe it, if you have a drag queen playing the character, camp is like not even enough of a word to go for what it's doing. But I do think that they nail what they're trying to go for with this very excessive theatrical, overly dramatic character that makes sense for what the character is and who you're getting to play the character, and that whole approach. And I think it's just like it feels like a really holistic take on this because the character's so extreme. I love their fashion, the like weird piano key whole like suit or whatever. Yes. And there's the piece where they sort of come down from the rooftop, and obviously they were like left down by a train or crane or something that was cut out in post. But the way the big coattails like flutter in the wind as Maestro like flutters down, and the sense of like power and control the character has, it's really potent. And I think when you get some of those big sequences, like them doing the Pyramid of Mars thing of going back to her present day and showing, hey, like if we fuck up, like the world is destroyed. So don't just assume that the world is fine because it was fine when you were alive. Like, if we fuck up in 1963, like time is malleable, particularly when you're dealing with an entity like this. And then Maestro is just there because I don't think Maestro exists in time the way that we understand time because it's a weird god creature. Like all of that stuff.
Same with the Toymaker did that too.
Yes, the Toymaker did that as well. Right? Like I think there's just there's a sense of power. And if you're trying to follow up Neil Patrick Harris, that's a hard act to follow. And I think Jinx Monsoon it's a really great piece of casting. It's a really great performance. And there's something I've enjoyed about the fact that so far with both gods have been played by Americans. And I kind of think it would be amazing if they just kept that up. Like, let's get some like nice, like kind of queer or gender non-conforming American actors to just be all of the weird pantheon gods in Doctor Who. I don't know if that's what they'll continue to do, but it's a funny coincidence or whatever. That's what it's been for both of them. Obviously Neil Patrick Harris used like 50 different accents or whatever, but he's still, there was a little bit of American in there, and he's obviously an American actor, so.
Yes. So the other thing is that this is completely in conversation with and homaging The Little Mermaid, the Disney movie.
Oh, yes.
It is because Ursula and the Little Mermaid, obviously there is the sea witch in every version of the Hans Christian Andersen's tale, but the thing that and I think it's the best thing about the Disney Little Mermaid, is that they made Ursula specifically a drag queen. That was the idea in the music that they wrote. It comes from, where the musicians had, come up in New York and the kinds of music they worked on, and it is there in the animation. They based the character's model on the drag queen Divine. All of that comes through in Ursula, and of course Ursula is this sea god who steals Ariel's voice and has these musical powers, and so this is like basically a live-action version of that, and was just making me reflect on how fucking cowardly the live-action Little Mermaid they did was, where they cast Melissa fucking McCarthy as Ursula. It's like, no, you should get someone like this. It doesn't have to be literally Jinx Monsoon, but there's a million people who could do like a cool live-action drag queen version of Ursula, and they got Melissa McCarthy, and I love Melissa McCarthy, but not for that. I'm sorry, that's not who she is. But this is such a better live action version of Ursula than you're ever going to get from actual Disney, because they're actually engaging with the kind of subculture that comes from and the kinds of performance and camp you get from it. And like, I wouldn't so much say, Sean, that this goes beyond the word camp. I would say this is the real thing. And a lot of us have not experienced actual uncut, pure camp, right?
Yes, that might be like camp has become diluted as a term in culture to the point where it no longer feels sufficient to describe the thing it was designed to actually describe.
Yeah. The other thing I think it's playing with is Pennywise from It, where they keep coming out of the piano with it's just the hand, and they crawl out. And that is a thing, like Pennywise. I don't know if Pennywise ever literally comes out of a piano, but Pennywise comes out of things, right? And it's like this dream monster that just emerges from places, even though, as the Doctor points out, they couldn't have come out of the piano because the piano was making sounds, and that's not how a piano works. A person can't sit inside a piano. But all of that is so cool and scary, and hilarious. And I also think Jinx Monsoon, and to a lesser extent Neil Patrick Harris, are two actors or performers who I don't think would fit in with like the older sci-fi version of Doctor Who. I think they're big actors, right? And I don't know if I think sometimes when Doctor Who has gone for the big performance before in something like the first version of the John Sim Master or the Sacha Dhawan Master, where they're just trying to do kind of the Joker thing, I think it feels out of place. This is the kind of high camp thing you can do in this kind of fantasy setting and make it feel, one, it doesn't feel like you're just ripping off a DC Comics character, and two, it feels like it fits in so naturally with the kind of story we're telling.
Yeah, and because partially it's just this entity is not exist in the way that we understand existence, right? And so this sort of almost like otherworldly, like extremity of the character, it fits, and it because what the character is doing also feels like truly powerful. I think there's an actual menace communicated with Neil Patrick Harris and then here with Jinx Monsoon. And that's always been part of the problem with those like Joker-fied performances, is that they're also with these Saturday morning cartoon style villains that have to be thwarted trivially every single time. And here, I mean, I think it's like maybe the biggest weakness of the episode is I think how Maestro is defeated feels like a bit too pat of like, oh, Doctor, are you a musical genius? Is like, yes, I can figure it out because I've had my life experience, and then he gets most of the way there and he can't. But now we have the true genius of John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and that is what will save the day. It's like, and I think John Lennon and Paul McCartney, musical geniuses, don't get me wrong. It's a bit, it ends up collapsing a little bit too much into and here's the Beatles historical episode, because that's how the Beatles historical episode would end, is with John Lennon and Paul McCartney discovering the magic chord that defeats the witches or whatever, in the same. That's how the Dickens thing ended. That's how the Shakespeare thing ended. That's how all of these historicals end. And I think it's the one thing that is particularly difficult about what they're going for with this kind of fiction, that I'm curious to see how Russell T Davies tackles it. Because both times they've gone for these kinds of villains, they haven't really figured out how do you actually beat them. Because the game of catch and the giggle is the worst part of that episode. And then the music battle itself is awesome here. Like, I think that is way more interesting than the game of catch. And the whole, Devil Went Down to Georgia style fiddle and all that shit. Like, it's great. There's a whole rich tradition that they're playing into with that. But actually doing the resolution where the good guys win, that's a pretty hard thing to play with these kinds of villains, and I don't think RTD has really nailed it. It's not the most important part of the episode to nail, so it certainly doesn't sink it, but it's one of the things that keeps it from being an all-time great episode. Right now what it is an amazing, off-the-wall fucking eccentric episode that I feel like I need to watch a couple more times to fully settle on if I were to rank this. Where would it rank? I don't know, because it's so crazy. It does some things so exceptionally well. How well all that stuff actually comes together at the very end to create something that's moves to that next tier, I'm not fully convinced on yet on my first viewing. But that's the only notable real flaw or criticism I have with the episode, is the ending to me feels not quite there.
Yeah. I think I probably agree, although two notes I would make on that is, one, I do like, and this is another thing where I was just thinking about things you have said, Sean, on this podcast about the Doctor. I like that the Doctor says, I'm not a genius, and repeats that multiple times, and says the only reason I have this musical ability is because music, as he says, comes from life experience, and I've had a lot of it. It's very similar to the end of... it's the season 7 episode with Matt Smith, the Rings of Akaten. It's the same idea. Yeah. So I like that dynamic. It's very true to the Doctor. And then on the Beatles side of it, one thing I do like, and this is just in part because of how they approach the historical here, I was a little worried of like, how do they actually do the Beatles in this episode?
Yeah.
Because those are big pop culture figures to try. And the answer is because of the weird maestro of it all, they don't have to. These aren't the Beatles. These are like four really boring British people who grew up in a sad London with no music, right? And so they don't actually have to be John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And the whole bit at the end is like this residual essence of them comes through, and so it is more exciting than the Shakespeare or the Charles Dickens version of that, which is just they continue to be Charles Dickens and Shakespeare. I agree, it's not the neatest ending, but it does the 1-2 punch of one. They don't actually have to get the Beatles perfect. In fact, it's funnier because they clearly are not Paul McCartney and John Lennon, and then I think the ending gets to have a little bit more stakes to it because of that.
Yes, I was wondering because they play out that whole sequence where John comes up to the piano and he sees the chorus and he's like about to play it, and I was like, are they really just gonna have it be just John Lennon playing the chorus? It's like, man, you're gonna open up a whole fucking can of worms
Yes.
about people debating like who's credited on what, who is like the real genius of the Beatles. Are we really gonna have the John Paul like debate? Is like that's what's gonna happen here now? And then they're like, no, okay, we're taking the easy middle path. Let's have them both do it together because it's the John Lennon and Paul McCartney songwriting partnership. That's the genius of the Beatles. It's like, okay, good. That's the nice, and peaceful solution to this argument that we don't have to have. We don't have to get these waters. But it would have been very funny if RTD was just like a hardcore John Lennon guy, and he was just like, no, it's John. He's the real. He was, Paul McCartney's good, but I think John Lennon was the spice. He was like the extra genius salt that like made the Beatles the Beatles. And if he just did that and just made every person over a certain age watching this episode incredibly angry.
That would have been funny, although we do have to acknowledge it still leaves out fucking George Harrison.
Yes.
And his songwriting genius, which, to be fair, at least in 1963, he hadn't started. So I think we can make that excuse for why they leave George Harrison out here.
It should have been Ringo.
Songs, yeah.
What if it was Ringo?
What if it was John and then Ringo comes up and we leave Paul out entirely? I would have applauded. That would have been amazing. Yeah. And it would have been Ringo and they come up and play the first chords of Octopus's Garden.
Yes, no, exactly. So he just starts railing on that thing, playing Octopus's Garden just as the whole thing, and that's what saves the day. Oh my god.
That's the one Beatles song they get, is Octopus's Garden.
But they do a whole montage where it's John and Paul, and they're just like running through all of it, man. It's like, oh, we got to do Penny Lane. It's like, oh, we're doing Strawberry Fields Forever. We're just running through everything. It's just like nothing's working. George comes up and he starts playing something. And it's like, even that's not doing it. And then it's like, an octopus's garden with you. It's like, and everyone turns around and it's just Ringo back there. It's like, let's go, Ringo. And when they save the day, it turns out that was the God's chord or whatever that concealed the devil. It was Octopus's Garden the whole time.
That actually would have made this one of the best episodes ever made.
Yes,
it would also have definitely made it the most expensive Doctor Who episode ever.
It would be the dumbest way to blow the entire budget of the season, but it would have made this the best episode of Doctor Who of all time.
All right, guys, good news, we got 7 different Beatles songs. Bad news, we need 7 bottle episodes. So if you can all write like just episodes set in the TARDIS, because between that TARDIS set and the Beatles songs, we have no more budget.
Yeah, actually, no, we sold the TARDIS set, so if you could just have every episode be Ncuti Gatwa sitting on a stool and talking into camera as he narrates his adventures, and my cousin, he can draw, and he's willing to just work for free. He's like 20. So he can just do some nice drawings so we can bring those up to accompany the narration. But that's all we got. We got a spotlight, a stool, a room, a microphone, and my cousin who's in school, he'll do some drawings for us. And that's the rest of the season.
All right, I think we're getting a little loopy here, Sean. So anything else to say about these 2 episodes of Doctor Who?
They're good, and I'm really excited. It's nice to have Doctor Who back in the proper way, which to have it be back and to be different. It needs to be both of those things, and they have nailed it. Yes. I cannot describe how excited I am also for the Stephen Moffat episode. He's my boy, and it's been a while. I mean, he wrote a lot of episodes of Doctor Who. And then he's taken a good break, though. And he said that he probably wouldn't write another one, and then I knew that was a lie, because it's always a lie when they say that shit. I'm very, very, very excited to see what he can write for Ncuti Gatwa, because he can write some fucking Doctor Who, man.
Indeed. And I'm very glad Moffat has not taken the, like, religiously I'm done with the show. He's willing to come back for one-offs. That's great. I'm excited too. So yes, probably no weekly stuff next week, but maybe in 2 weeks, and we'll be able to talk about 2 episodes of Doctor Who and maybe Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and you guys can expect that as the next episode. I think that's probably what the next one will be, and it'll be fun, and I can't wait to see if there's any more musical numbers in the next Doctor Who episodes.
I hope there is.